broadcasting. Wait. There we go. My apologies, Your Honor. We were having some YouTube difficulties, and we will be broadcasting in just a moment.
That investment that we paid, that we gave to the IT department is starting to pay off. Mr. Miranda, thank you.
We are live, Your Honor.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your patience. Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Let the record show that all council members are present this evening. The first item is presentations. This is an opportunity for us to introduce employees who have recently been promoted. Would Thomas Curtis please join me down at the podium? Oh, no. This is like that game show in New York where we bring them on down, you know? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm really pleased to announce the promotion of Mr. Curtis, who was recently promoted to Senior Parks and Landscape Maintenance Worker. Thomas started his journey with the Maintenance Division as a PST General Maintenance Worker 3 in March of 2018. He officially joined our team in October of 2018 as a general laborer, promoted to Landscape and Parks Work 1 in February of 2019, and promoted to Landscape Park Maintenance Worker 2 in February of 2021. Thomas is originally from Michigan, or as he says, cold country, traveled around the world during his time in the Air Force. Thank you for your service. And his current hobbies include gold digging. So Thomas's career here in the city of Newark may not be long-lived. So let's take advantage of him today, visiting parks, hunting, fishing, and driving to Tahoe when time permits. Congratulations on a well-deserved promotion. If I could have Jason Avery join me, please. Ladies and gentlemen, Jason Avery was recently promoted to the position of Senior Streets Maintenance Worker. Jason's journey within the Maintenance Division began in November of 2011 when he joined as a general laborer. Jason then progressed to the role of Landscape and Park Maintenance Worker 1 in June of 2012, followed by another promotion to Landscape and Park Maintenance 2 in November of 2013. In his free time, Jason enjoys surfing, mastering the arts of grilling. He's the resident pit master for the Maintenance Division. I certainly look forward to those invitations in the near future. Playing baseball and enjoying the great outdoors through camping adventures. You're likely to spot Jason behind the wheel of a street sweeper. Congratulations, Jason, on a well-deserved promotion. These are always fun events, ladies and gentlemen. The first event I'm going to recognize is proclamation for Promotores Month. With our Promotores staff members, Ed Rivera, Adriana Lopez, and Veronica Torres, please join me here. And if there's any other Promotores in the city of Newark that are here tonight, please join me here as well. That's okay. Hey, every council member, mayor loves a crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, this is proclaiming October 23 Promotores Month, it's proclamation number 1904, whereas promotores are Spanish-speaking women and men who are trained to be advocates, who create solutions to community needs. And whereas the Newark Recreation and Community Services Department, Promotores Newark plays an invaluable role in making the city of Newark a more welcoming place to live. Whereas the Newark Promotores act as intermediaries between healthcare, social services, educational institutions, and the Latino community. They provide information referrals and training to ensure access to these vital services. Whereas the Newark Promotores work is grounded in strong cultural values, including a deep appreciation for personal relationships and an eagerness to help and support each other in our community. Whereas they learn to navigate a new culture and community, the Newark Promotores become guides to other families new to our city. The Newark Promotores Newark is like an extended family providing social and emotional support to each other. Whereas October 23 has been designated as Promotores Month. Therefore, I, Michael Hannon, on behalf of my colleagues on the City Council, recognize this month as Promotores Month in Newark and thank Newark Promotores for the compassion and the commitment they show to their community. They are role models for all of us, including their families, their children, and their neighbors, to ensure the health, safety, and educational and financial well-being of the most underserved families in our community. So please congratulate them on this recognition.
Before I start, I have a few words, but I'd like to take a minute. We have one of our promotores whose family is from Acapulco, Mexico. And as many of you know, we had a hurricane, Category 5, that actually hit that city. And we finally heard from the family this afternoon. So I want to make sure that we keep your family in our prayers and everyone in our city of Acapulco. Good evening, Mayor Mike Hannon, Vice Mayor Susie Collazo, Council members Luis Freitas, Mike Pucci, and Matthew Jorgensen. I also like to acknowledge the executive team, staff member, promotores, and our supervisor, Cheryl Galvez. It is an honor for me to represent the Promotores Community Network and receive recognition during the month of the Promotor in October. I believe it is important that promotores are acknowledged as vital frontline workers who are the link to families in need of resources in our community. Over the past 3 years, the Promotores Network has grown from a couple of hundred of families to a robust community advocacy network. The Promotores team and volunteers who lead this network are essential leaders in the Latino community and passionate residents of the city of Newark, which constitute 1/3 of the population. Promotores are remarkable contributors to this community, especially the Hispanic population. They embody the spirit of cultural pride, leadership, and community engagement. Their dedication serves as an inspiration to us as we celebrate the month of the Promotor in October and appreciate its invaluable impact on our society. Thank you, Mayor, Council members, and to all the promotores present here today for your continued support in making an indelible mark of positive change. Voy a tomar unas palabritas, poquito en español, para agradecerles. Es un honor para mí representar a la red comunitaria de promotoras y recibir este reconocimiento durante el mes del promotor en octubre. Creo que es importante que los promotores sean reconocidos como trabajadores vitales de primera línea, que son el vínculo con las familias que necesitan recursos. En los últimos 3 años, la red de promotores ha crecido de un par de cientos de familias a una sólida red de defensa comunitaria. El equipo de promotores y los voluntarios que lideran esta red son líderes esenciales de la comunidad latina y residentes apasionados de la ciudad de Newark, que constituyen un tercio de la población. Los promotores son contribuyentes notables a esta comunidad, especialmente a la población hispana. Encarnan el espíritu de orgullo cultural, liderazgo y compromiso comunitario. Su dedicación nos sirve de inspiración mientras celebramos el mes del promotor en octubre y apreciamos su invaluable impacto en nuestra sociedad. Gracias a todos por estar aquí presentes.
We're going to take a moment to do a group photo, folks. And we're really honored to have State Senator Aisha Wahab here tonight to join us. And I've asked the senator to join us with this group photo. Senator? Do you want to stand in front of the podium? Get up front. You know you are up front.
That's going to be the best photo, right?
As you know, the city of Newark is a multicultural city. We are welcoming to all residents of our community. So it's my pleasure to also announce that we're issuing a proclamation for Filipino American History Month. And I would ask Rosalinda Canales to join me here at the podium, please. The reason I step away from the podium, my brother said, you know, Mike, when you stand there and clap, it makes so much noise, you got to step back and clap. So I got family members that are counseling me all the time on how to run a meeting. It's our pleasure to recognize Filipino American History Month with proclamation number 1905, whereas California is proud to be home to the largest Filipino American population in the nation that contributes greatly to shaping, advancing, and enriching our community. Nearly 100,000 Filipinos live in Alameda County, representing 6% of the total population. Whereas Filipino Americans are the third largest Asian American group in the United States and second largest Asian American group in the state of California. Whereas the Filipino American National Historical Society recognizes the year 1763 as the date of the first permanent Filipino settlement in the United States in San Malo, Louisiana. Whereas in November of 2009, the United States Congress passed a resolution to officially recognize October as Filipino American History Month. And whereas Filipino men and women have made valuable contributions in all areas of life throughout California and the United States, including government, business, education, arts and sciences, medicine, healthcare, law enforcement, and the military. Whereas Filipino Americans have a long history of engaging in social justice movements across the nation, including but not limited to the United Farm Workers Movement and the Hawaii Sugar Plantation. Whereas the Filipino American community have shared their rich culture and traditions with neighbors and friends while setting examples of model citizens and public servants. Therefore, I, Michael Hannon, on behalf of my colleagues on the City Council in Newark, encourage all members of our community to engage in efforts to learn and respect the history of Filipino American community. And so I issue this proclamation today, and I'm so proud to be able to present it to you today as well. So let me give this to you, and
thank you. This will only take 2 hours.
We don't run our meetings as long as Fremont.
All right. Union City, you mean? On behalf of the Filipino American National Historical Society East Bay chapter, that's Alameda County and Contra Costa, I'm here to accept this proclamation, and I believe this is your first. So I'm really grateful to the mayor and the council for making this happen, and congratulations for doing that. We are really appreciative of that. There are 43 chapters nationwide. That includes Hawaii and Alaska. So it's a big group, but it's not very well known. So thank you so much. That was 2 hours.
Good to see you. Yeah, picture? Congratulations. It's with great honor that I have the opportunity to introduce our state senator, Senator Aisha Wahab, who is going to provide us with a California legislative update. Senator Wahab represents California's 10th Senate district, which includes the city of Newark. She was elected in 2022. Senator Wahab entered public life to amplify the voices of renters and build a community that everyone can afford to call home. She prioritizes policies in the lives of seniors, women, and children, addressing housing affordability, civic engagement, education, and economic inequality. She served as a Hayward Council member, chair of the Alameda County Human Relations Commission, Women's March organizer, and a nonprofit board member to several Bay Area organizations. She was also selected as a member of the White House Roundtable of African American Leaders. Please join me in welcoming Senator Wahab to the city of Newark.
Thank you. Well, first, I just want to say I really do appreciate being able to represent Newark. I actually lived in Newark for roughly a decade myself. In the past decade, I will say that Newark has grown significantly. I used to live near the Morden Salt Factory. So it was very industrial. I actually drove through it maybe like 3 days ago. And a lot more development, a lot more housing. So I just want to say kudos to all the hard work that you guys have done over the years to allow people to have homes here. I also want to congratulate all the folks that have been honored today. I know that we've worked with many of you guys, not only at the state level, but also locally. And I just want to announce that we're trying to plan a turkey drive to give a frozen turkey to needy families. We want to be able to partner where we can, and our district director is here as well, and you guys can grab a card, but I'll also share information here. So my name's Aisha Wahab. I represent this area. It's the most populous Senate district in the state of California. So we have well over 1 million people, where most usually represent around 900,000-ish. And I'm going to go over some bills that were authored, signed into law, co-authored and signed into law. I chair public safety for the Senate, and we're going to talk about fentanyl. Fentanyl is a big topic in the state, not necessarily in this particular district, but I'm sure our law enforcement professionals probably know a little bit more about what's happening with fentanyl in the district. Some budget wins and grant wins. Before I begin, I also just want to say, which we do not have a slide for this, today we just released a letter that I worked on with the California Legislative Jewish Caucus to highlight some of the things that are happening in the world today. And we addressed the letter to President Biden and Secretary Blinken, specifically asking for humanitarian aid and any diplomatic effort to preserve life, regardless of race, religion, or ethnicity. And I'm very proud to say that with that work, in a very short time frame, I was able to get every single diversity caucus of the state legislature to sign on, from the Black caucus to the Latino caucus to API caucus to the LGBTQ caucus, Native American caucus, and many others, the Women's caucus. It is very important in this moment in time to highlight that when I talk about the American dream, it means a dream that all people are respected in this country, regardless of their background and regardless of their religion. And the entire state legislature 100% stands against anti-Semitism and Islamophobia and any other bigotry that's out there. That is our goal and that is our effort, and I just want to say that I'm very proud of being able to do that, and today was announced. Other than that, we will get started. So some of the bills, I am a freshman, I just got elected, and so I haven't even completed a year, but we have pretty much every single one of our bills that went to the governor was signed into law, except for one that was very important to me, but it was very, very important to kind of see some of these bills get passed. SB 461 is a cultural observance of holiday time. You know, several people have already spoken representing diverse backgrounds. Our district is one of the most diverse in the state. The Bay Area, anybody that grew up in the Bay Area knows that you get to meet every type of person. And this allows for state employees to be able to use their cultural or religious holiday at will. So it doesn't matter, you know, for example, we added Diwali, we added Eid, we added a number of other holidays, literally a list of like more than a dozen. And it represents this particular district. And we're very proud that that got signed. SB 462 is a data sharing bill. We have 58 counties. And oftentimes the counties don't talk to each other when sharing data, and those individuals that are on social services, sometimes when they're moving to an area that's cheaper to live in regards to cost of living, it's very hard to inform the social worker that these were the programs I was involved in a previous county. So this allows for a lot of safety net services for people who move between counties to be very easily identifiable. We have SB 463, which is a reunification of parental cooperation. I personally grew up in foster care, and the largest amount of people that are in foster care, which is roughly a 60,000 population in California, this youth is largely Black and brown kids, and oftentimes their parents want to reunite with them, and maybe there was a barrier because of language or a situation that happened that was a misunderstanding or so forth. Or some training that's needing to be provided. This removes the penalization and the presumption that the parent who cannot attend a program, because some of the areas in California are very rural. Some of the areas do not have programs and services, so they are not able to apply to certain programs or services because it's not offered in their area. So we want to make sure that the idea is that the judge makes the best assessment for the child and not have a forced penalization because they missed one program. This was actually a bill that Santa Clara County Social Services and the county as a whole wanted to push, and we did that. I'm very proud of SB 464. It's a Survivor Sexual Assault Bill of Rights. It basically expands the rights of victims and survivors of sexual assault and increases rape kit testing and auditing. Many other states have already done this, and we now provide a lot more resources to victims. They get to know what's happening in a timely manner. SB 465 is refugee services. The services are provided on a single website, which allows for a lot of service providers to be able to help the new arrivals. We are seeing new arrivals not only from Afghanistan or Iraq, but throughout the Middle East, throughout Central and Latin America, and much more. And oftentimes they don't know exactly what's available to them. So this is now mandated that there has to be information in a very simple way. SB 555 is the first in the state social housing bill. Now, this is specifically to provide stable, affordable housing. The reason why this bill was the first that's ever been passed is specifically because it does identify pathways for 1.4 million stable, affordable homes for Californians via public, nonprofit, and cooperative housing production and acquisition. We know that we focus, and I've talked to many of you guys, need to focus on moderate, low, and extremely low income housing. We build, but at the same time, we have not been able to build affordable homes. So this does prioritize that, and it works and allows HCD, the Housing Community Development Department of the state of California, to identify what is currently available, what is naturally more affordable, what is ways that we can potentially ensure that people stay in their homes longer. It's a full depth analysis with a lot more information there. And this is actually an iconic bill that everyone's very, very proud of. I will say that I have co-authored a significant number of bills. For example, SB 567 with Senator Durazo for rent caps and just cause evictions. There is a new renters caucus that I belong to. There's probably about 4 or 5 renters in the entire state legislature in both houses. So we need to be able to exercise our voice as well. We also worked with, I often say that it's not personalities we vote on. We vote on policy. My entire staff understands this, and I've worked with Senator Grove, who is a Republican, out of the Central Valley. SB 14 was a bill she's introduced multiple times, and it was killed multiple times. It's a human trafficking bill. It was killed in our Public Safety Committee. It was reintroduced after Senator Grove and I spoke, and she was willing to take amendments to make the policy better. The human trafficking bill was signed by Governor Newsom and specifically increases the penalty that if you traffic a person under the age of 18, it's considered a serious felony. I think regardless of background, gender, age, anything like that, if you human traffic a child, you deserve a severe punishment. And that passed unanimously pretty much on both houses. And it's, again, the hard work of just collaborating with folks that really want to do the right thing, and we're trying to move forward together. We have had, as chair of public safety, I spend most of my time correcting other people's bills. It's a lot of redundant bills, to be completely frank. We do push bills out. We try to help as much as possible, and we try to address the issues in a way that does not necessarily harm victims, nor aggressively and overly harms perpetrators. I think rehab and a lot of mental health concerns and a lot of the crimes that are being committed, we want to make sure that the punishment really matches the crime. So that is one of the goals for public safety, and we're trying to protect as many people. And again, I always try to prioritize victims' rights first, because that is kind of being lost in the sauce, if you will. Public safety is a big topic for me. Specifically, I have been tasked with carrying the Senate Joint Resolution number 7, the Right to Safety Resolution. This was Governor Newsom's legislation that calls on Congress to call for a narrowly focused constitutional convention enacting 4 common sense firearms regulation. 4 laws that literally we have supported in the state of California that the majority of Americans, regardless of party, do support. That's increasing the age, increasing background checks, and the hopes of banning assault weapons. We've signed into law a number of different bills regarding fentanyl and much more. Fentanyl has been a topic not often talked about too much in the Bay Area, but it's growing. It is a substance that has been, number one, it's synthetic. The tip of a pencil, a little drop or two that covers the tip of a pencil, can kill somebody. So the overdose potential is great. It is something that has moved from the East Coast to the West Coast. It is often a powder substance, and so hence when people are taking pills or powders, it is often laced with fentanyl. It kills, it's extremely deadly, and at the same time, the high lasts for about 2 hours. So unlike some of the previous drugs, the high is extreme and great. It's a synthetic drug. it also only allows the person who's an addict to have that high for 2 hours. So hence they want to do it over and over and over and over again per day. And it's very cheap. It's about $2.50, right? So hence if you have a panhandler asking for funds and you think that they're potentially doing it for drugs and so forth, it is very cheap and it's very dangerous. So we have definitely co-authored a number of bills and supported a significant amount of bills. Fentanyl is a big topic. I will say that I sit on the fentanyl working committee, working group amongst the state Senate, and it is basically myself, the chair of public safety, the chair of public health, chair of business and professions, chair of judiciary, and chair of budget, as well as a couple of other members. We have signed a number of bills regarding fentanyl into law, specifically education, requirements around schools, just educating folks, specifically having testing strips and so forth, as much as we can to reduce harm and educate the larger public and working with law enforcement. I will say that one of the good things that we can do is provide budget wins to our district. $10.6 million was secured for District 10 in this budget cycle. I will say that oftentimes the budgets, and I want to just address this for everybody, we make our requests from all of the local agencies, the local cities, and try to work as much as possible to prioritize their interests in alignment with our interest of our office as a senator. And then we work with the chair of budget from the Senate, who then works with the chair of budget from the Assembly, who then has to work with also the governor's office. So hence, there's a lot of chefs in the kitchen, and we don't always get what we want, right? Especially during an economic downturn. I will say that the city of Hayward received roughly about $3.7 million, specifically for the Hayward Evaluation and Response Team. It's called the HEART program. Specifically, if somebody makes a call for support 911, a specific and appropriate response team arrive, whether that's paramedics or whether that's police. It's a program I actually initiated in the city of Hayward, so I definitely wanted to see that move forward. A youth center, the county of Santa Clara, the city of Santa Clara, city of Fremont, city of Milpitas, and the BART board all received chunks of money spanning from $500,000 to nearly $2 million, largely around housing, because that is my number one issue, as well as reentry resource centers or transportation. So I just want to highlight that. We are more than happy to work with nonprofits and, of course, the cities and other jurisdictions to see what we can do for next year. I will say that our office goes a little bit above and beyond the norm as well. We have informed many different jurisdictions, nonprofits, and so forth, that if they are applying for a grant at the state or federal level, we are more than happy to sign a letter in support of those particular programs, as long as, again, it's in line with our vision as well. So affordable housing is our biggest issue. As you can see, there's a number of things there, as well as $650,000 for climate change to develop a climate adaptation planning and much more. And then our district activities, to be completely frank, in Newark, I love Newark personally. We did participate in the Mariachi Festival, Dia de los Muertos, shoreline cleanup, the mobile hours. We try to be as available to the public as possible and not just have our district office. So we will come out into the community the first Thursday of every month and continue to support the community and uplift whatever we can. Our district office events, we've had a number. Again, we are a brand new office, and we are trying to be as proactive as possible. I hope that everyone understands that we are partners in the community to uplift not only the programs that are currently underway, but also work in other ways. So we've had backpack giveaways, senior resource fairs, Cinco de Mayo events, cleanups, and much more. We do have other events coming forward, and so we want just the larger district to understand that we are partners where we can be. Our district office is located in Fremont. It is Senator Wajkowski's previous district office. We have not found a new location, and so we're staying put for some time. This is the email address of our district director and our direct office number. We're happy to answer any questions that the City Council may have. And we just want to thank you for giving us this opportunity to explain what we do. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. Questions, comments? I want to thank you for being here today. I had a couple comments and a couple questions, if I may. I want to thank you for your support on SB 14 on human trafficking. I think it's one thing when the legislature puts into law increased penalties on human trafficking, but it takes courage from local district attorneys to prosecute those violators to the greatest extent of the law. And I'm hoping that your championing this legislation will result in our district attorney being aggressive when it comes to sentencing folks that commit those heinous crimes. We, this council in Newark, absolutely support affordable housing. We recognize it is an absolute priority in our community. And the example I'd like to give is we have a master plan for the New Park Mall, which calls for about 1,500 rental units. And when I met with Brookfield back a couple years ago, and they showed us their vision for that property, I made it real clear to them that I wanted to see a percentage of affordable housing units in that development. Fast forward a couple years, they came back to show an update version of that plan, and oh, by the way, the affordable housing was not present. And I had told them 2 years earlier, unless I see an affordable housing component, it was not going to be something that I was going to support. So they quickly redid the math and came forward with, I believe it was 9 or 12% of affordable housing units in that project. Wasn't the number of units I wanted, because I'd like to see more, but I felt our foot was now in the door to get additional affordable housing units in that project, because that was one of 5 phases. So we absolutely support the need for affordable housing, and every development that comes to us for review and approval, that will certainly be a question that I ask, and I know my colleagues will be asking as well. I want to commend you on your champion the budget for the various communities within the Senate district. You're to be applauded for that. It was a little bit disappointing to see that the city of Newark was not recognized, because we, in all honesty, Senator, had submitted 2 letters to you back in March when it was requested. Give us an idea of some of the projects that you would like my office to champion or fund. We sent that letter back in March, and then we sent it again in June. We didn't get a response from your office. I'm not going to spend time talking about what could have and should have happened from my perspective, but I'm hopeful, as you articulated tonight, that as we move forward with looking at opportunities to provide additional funding for cities within the district, that certainly Newark will be considered as part of that equation.
Definitely. So number one is we don't want to get anybody's hopes up. The budget request that we received from Newark was a significant number of projects. We also have to prioritize. Originally before April, we were asked to submit requests, but then we were told that basically any budgetary ask will not happen. And we were told that, and so we had to pause, number one. Number two, the agreement between the Senate and the Assembly was that the Assembly would be able to get a larger budget request, specifically because, I hate to say it, but they run every 2 years. This is a tough year, and the economic downturn wasn't also, if you saw, the governor also cut significantly. He's also vetoed far more bills this year than previous governors in many years, and it's mostly based on cost. So as much as we have prioritized our list and submitted it, not every single project was funded. And we are a new office. We are learning the process as we go in some regard, but I do believe that we are going to be in constant communication. I have provided my cell and working with our city manager here, as well as our staff here. So moving forward, we're hoping that we can fund something.
Great, and that's our hope as well, because we want to be valuable partners to you, because you represent a great community of Newark. Having been a former resident, it's nice to hear that. So we thank you for coming tonight, and we certainly hope that you come back on an annual basis with updates as to what's going on within the district in terms of legislation and budget and things of that nature, because you're always welcome here.
Thank you.
So thank you. Let's. I turn to my colleagues.
Sorry.
What's that? Okay. Councilmember Bucci.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Senator, thank you for coming tonight. We obviously love having one of our own who lived in Newark for so long in the Senate. That is very exciting, and I would also like to thank you for your work on human trafficking on the fentanyl front, and especially on renters' rights. I think a lot of times renters are overlooked, and renters are often sustain the brunt of a lot of things that aren't necessarily fair, and there are a lot of renters that make up a community, and they are pushed out quite often. So I appreciate them having a voice there. You know, I know housing is one of your big pieces of work up there, and I read a study recently about last year and the houses that were sold in this country. 22% of the houses sold last year were sold to corporate investment firms and hedge funds. That's 1 in 5. And then in California, we were actually at 29%, which is almost 1 in 3. When I think about the work that you do and the work that we do here and the battles we fight for, you know, 10 units here, 12 units there, and then you have private corporate investment firms that just buy it up with unlimited cash. How are we supposed to compete against that? How is somebody supposed to actually win a bid for that? And when we're all out here breaking our backs and killing ourselves for every piece of affordable housing we can build, but 1 in 3 goes off to a hedge fund manager who then hires a local management company to crank the rent up on people, right? How are we ever going to get ahead? And I guess my question is that on the state's radar? Are we doing anything to address it? And what can be done to address it? Because last year, 29% of housing stock going into those sorts of hands is unacceptable. It's not sustainable. It's the rake. And how many years until they have it all? And then where are we? So what can be done on that front, and what is being done, and can we do anything?
So you and I have the same beliefs, right, that more needs to be done, number one. I will give you guys an example. So in Hayward, we have rent control. There's roughly less than 20 cities in the entire state of California that has rent control, right, or some type of rent stabilization. Now, rent control is seen as a dirty word amongst a lot of people, a lot of electeds, in fact, right, and homeowners, property owners, and much more. But the honest truth is that it is one way to help our most vulnerable populations. In Hayward, they had a rent control policy since 1979. Right, and they're still developing. It's one of the biggest growing cities in our district, fastest growing cities, and the landlord is still able to increase rent year over year by 5%. That's one of the best returns in this market that we can get on anything we invest in, right? And that's guaranteed they can increase rents by 5%. Other cities have it at different numbers. And there is a law that requires that homes built after 1995, specifically multifamily complexes. Rent control does not cover single-family homes, condos, townhomes, or duplexes. They're specifically for multifamily complexes, right? Apartments, large apartments, right? And oftentimes, a lot of the real estate industry tries to hide some of these facts and the details. When we expanded our rent control from 1,000 units in Hayward to 10,000. Within 3 years, we reduced our homeless population by 22%. No other city has done that, and in the same time frame, the state of California has not done that, right? We carry the nation's largest homeless population, right? More than 50% live in California. And we have a growing silver tsunami, as they call it, which is a lot of our older generation is retiring. Now, this older generation is our fastest and largest growing homeless population. These are our seniors, our parents, our grandparents. They are on a fixed income, if they are lucky to be able to be on a fixed income. They cannot afford a studio that costs $2,000 or $2,500. Let's be honest about the math here. Right? If you're spending that much and you're on disability or retirement, how are you going to pay for your groceries or your electricity or so forth. So I hate to say it, but greed is something that we have to control, right? There's not enough checks and balances at the state level. So I introduced a bill that would reform the state bill of Costa-Hawkins, which basically says after 1995, a development is not subject to rent control, any post-development, if you will. And that bill was introduced to the Senate floor, and I took amendments to make it watered down significantly. And yet, at the same time, we had 15 senators vote yes, I support this logical, well-balanced policy. 16 people voted no, and 9 people decided to not vote at all, which is nearly 20 to 25% of the state Senate. The fact that housing is the #1 issue of all residents in the majority of all cities, and we aren't doing enough. And the answer is not just to build. You know, you guys have to deal with RENA numbers and hitting these quotas and that's not enough. We have to ensure that people stay housed in affordable units, not be pushed out to the street. And the honest truth is that when we allow people to stay housed for longer in the same unit, it affects the child's education, affects family well-being, it affects a lot of different community issues that we struggle with that isn't necessarily directly related to housing, not obviously. But when a kid has to move from school to school to school because their parents have to figure out what's a cheaper unit, that's a problem. That affects a family. When they have to drive 2-3 hours every morning to get to the work and the jobs here in the Bay Area, that affects our transportation, our environment, our everything. So I'm very frustrated at the state level because the conversation is largely about building. And I will say the reason why our bill did not pass is specifically senators told me, Aisha, this is very common sense policy. We actually really like it. It's very thought out. And it's just a reform bill. It's not a repeal bill, right? And there's been many ballot measures that have tried to repeal this particular bill. They said, but it's bad politics. We can't vote for it because the real estate industry has invested so much money and time. In fact, all these ballot measures, the 40% that vote for it every single year that are largely renters, are outspent 3-1, okay? So you have $80 million being spent every single time this hits the ballot, literally 3 times in the past 10 years. So we need to work together. We need to be able to call our other legislators that represent different interests and tell them that we need some common sense reforms. And if not, the people have to vote on the ballot, but sadly, our elections laws allow a lot of misinformation to hit the public. But I am telling you, our senior population is going to struggle the most in the next couple years. They say that it's going to triple within this decade. We're going to see more homeless people on our streets. And so it is the opportunity of all the cities as well that if I can't push it in the state dealing with 40 members of my house to make a decision, you guys can do this at a local level to pass local rent control and rent stabilization laws.
So, Senator, and I agree with you 100%. I agree with everything you're saying. I think that housing is the thread that connects so many of our issues and our troubles, and everything you said is spot on. But I am going to circle back to my question, because specifically, corporate investment firms and hedge funds that buy up 1 in every 3 houses in California have a huge impact on the housing stock.
We are interested in introducing policy that tackles some of this. It's not just the hedge funds. Number one, there's concerns about significant investment in single-family homes, right? The argument always ends up being it's a free market, right? Adam Smith's invisible hand theory, right? Yet if there's not enough checks and balances, and I only gave my example because that's something I actually pushed myself, right? We need more checks and balances. So 2 areas of interest for any policy we carry in our office is 2 areas. 1, protecting the most vulnerable community members, right? Number 2 is balancing power. There's not enough of that. And corporations cannot just buy all single family homes. They're not purchasing commercial as much as they are purchasing single families. And not only that, the vacancy rates are extremely high. In Alameda County alone, there's over 9,000 homeless individuals in the last point in time count about a year and a half ago or so, with 30,000 vacant units. We can house these people. But who's going to pressure the property owner to say, lower your rents? And there's also monopoly issues. I'm just going to say this because these are concerns I have. Monopoly laws are based on a federal law, right? It's interstate trade and commerce and so forth, and it's from the steel industry and so forth. Yet there are landlords in our cities, we know some of them, right, that own 89 units in one city alone, and they operate with separate LLCs, right, to protect their asset and say they are a small mom and pop landlord, which by definition is less than 4 units, right? They are not a small mom and pop landlord. There's not enough transparency. I introduced a transparency law this year. That got shoved down to a 2-year bill, right? We want a rental registry. All things I achieved in Hayward that literally shown a double-digit decrease in wrongful evictions within 12 months of introducing the registry. That if you have a unit, you need to tell us, one, are you going to evict people? How much was the original cost and how much is the secondary cost? And so much more. So I agree with you that there needs to be more done, but I haven't seen the appetite from some of my colleagues.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions or comments? I wanted to close with one last comment, Senator, and give you an opportunity to respond. In our letter back in March and then again in June, we talked about a number of park amenities that were going to be important to our community, including some infrastructure improvements in the Old Town neighborhood. So we identified some specific needs in our community that would benefit many of the community members that you see here this evening. In your budget wins, I noted that $1 million was given to BART. That really surprised me. BART is a conglomerate, as far as I can tell, who is awarded hundreds of millions of dollars every year by the state, and in my mind have failed to deliver equitable transportation, efficient transportation to many of our residents. How could BART get $1 million and the cities of Newark, Sunnyvale, and Union City not receive a dime?
So number one is that, again, there's a lot of people talking about budget and what specifically gets prioritized. We are informed after the decision is made by leadership, again, the 2 budget chairs and the governor's office. So it's not to say that we did not include this. So I just want to stress that as much as possible for the clarity of the process. Part 2 is the fact that I will be honest with you, my personal opinion of transportation is not favorable. Specifically, in the 9 Bay Area counties, we have nearly 30 agencies that provide transportation, right? I personally believe, and I have publicly said this, not only on the Transportation Committee, but in the Bay Area Caucus and much more, it needs to be consolidated, period, all right? It's a waste of money, and to your point, it's not efficient, right? However, transportation is one of the biggest necessities of the lowest income individuals in our community. And that is what I prioritize, is how do they get to work, right? Especially the more development we have with zero parking. They rely on BART, they rely on AC Transit, they rely on these things. AC Transit, for example, in the last 2 years, they wanted to cut 8 lines in the city of Hayward alone, right? I raised that as a concern on council. BART received the funding, 1, to ensure that we still have the infrastructure for public transit, as we are fighting not only our climate change efforts, but we are also fighting for equity and much more. Number 2, not everyone drives, and we need to make sure that, again, our infrastructure is in play. Number 3 is the amount of workers that would eventually not be able to move forward in our district, that they work in our cities, right? So there's a number of different things that I have to consider when prioritizing. Again, my priority list does change based on what leadership says. So they will also prioritize. BART as a whole has been a conversation, a topic for the Bay Area Caucus and for the entire Senate as a whole. So it is multiple senators giving their input, and if multiple senators have stated one thing, usually that gets bumped up. So there is a process. It's not very transparent 100% to me if I'm not on the budget committee, but on our end and what the Dem Caucus shares with us, that was one of the considerations. Transportation is a big issue.
Well, again, in conclusion, thank you for being here this evening. It's a pleasure to have you. And thank you for being open and transparent in addressing our concerns.
Definitely.
Because we don't have opportunities on a regular basis to have these exchanges. So it's nice to know that we can have these exchanges and know that moving forward, as you indicated, we're partners together.
Yes.
And the things that you support, we support, and we're hoping that we can provide the best services to our community, and I know you share in that as well.
Yes, and I want to be very clear. We have requested that every single city manager meet with our staff once a month, just to give an update on both sides, right, and have that consistent dialogue. My direct cell number is available to all of you, elected as well as staff. And at the same time, I personally believe this, and I know that I've been encouraging my staff, and for example, my district director is a licensed marriage and family therapist. We are hiring people that really care about social services and social issues to really go out in the community and help. We are a public servant, and we are at your service. That is our job, and that is what our commitment is to you, your city, and the constituents that we both share. So thank you.
You're welcome, and we share that philosophy, and I'll ask my colleagues to join me as we take a photo, please, with the state senator. City manager?
Hello. If former Mayor Nagy is watching our proceedings, would you let him know at 8:07 we're now going to get to city business? The next item on the agenda is our consent calendar. The consent calendar consists of the followings, D1 through D7. Are there any items that staff would like pulled from the consent calendar?
Not this evening, Your Honor.
Your Honor, if I might interrupt, public comment.
I'm sorry. Thank you. Oh, there it is. Public comment. This is an opportunity for the public to comment on any item that's not on the agenda this evening. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak to an item that's not on the agenda? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on. Thank you for the reminder. Are there any items that the City Council would like pulled from the consent calendar? The consent calendar consists of the following items. 1, the approval of the audited demands. 2, approval of the October 12, 2023 minutes. 3, resolution for acceptance of work with Sposito Engineering Incorporated for safe routes to school improvements, Project 1280. 4, adopt a resolution authorizing the city manager to execute a contractual equipment and services agreement with PB Loader Corporation for the purchase of a dump truck and authorization for outfitting by Classic Graphics and amend the 2022-2024 biennial budget and capital improvement plan. 5, adopt a resolution accepting public subdivision improvements for tract 8459 Compass Bay, a 138-unit residential subdivision generally located in Bayside, Newark, on the southeast corner of Enterprise and Hickory Street. 6, adopt a resolution authorizing the city manager to execute a contractual services agreement with Joseph Chow and Associates Incorporated for on-call architectural services. 7, adopt a resolution authorizing an amendment to the agreement with Stantic Consulting Incorporated for environmental services for the Maori Village project. Would someone like to move the items to be approved as recommended by staff, with any items approved by resolution or ordinance being numbered consecutively, and that the reading of the title suffice for purposes of introduction or adoption of the ordinance?
So moved.
That's moved by Councilmember Jorgen, seconded by Councilmember Rabucci. Let's please vote. and that passes unanimously with 5 ayes. The next item is public hearing to consider adoption of 2031 housing element and safety element of the City of Newark General Plan. Before we proceed, I want to note for the public that we will need to segment and provide final direction on certain housing element sites in order to address FPPC regulations related to the real property and business interests of some of my council colleagues. When these items are introduced for consideration, my colleagues will recuse themselves, and the council will take public comment and provide final direction as to those items only. And if I can just simplify that language, City Attorney, if a council member owns a piece of property within a certain distance of the property to be considered for potential development, they need to recuse themselves per FPPC recommendation. Did I characterize that correctly?
Yes, Your Honor, it's pursuant to the, that's correct, pursuant to the regulation.
Thank you. And just for, again, further clarification, City Attorney, is there a certain distance that their property must be from the potential site to be identified?
Yes, different distances trigger different analysis, but generally within 500 feet is presumed to be a conflict.
Great, thank you. I just want to make sure that everybody understood that. So in essence, if I'm a council member and I own a piece of property and it's located within 500 feet of one of those sites to be identified, I need to recuse myself per FPPC guidance. So staff report, Mr. Benoon?
Yes, good evening, Your Honor, and members of the council. Just to build on that, the presentation tonight is fairly extensive. We have a few introductory comments by our community development director. And then at that point, after fairly early on, we'll ask that the council proceed with the segmentation as to the conflicted council members. And following voting on that, we will then proceed with the remaining balance of the staff report, which is essentially the very extensive portion of the staff report. Before I pass it over to Mr. Turner, I would just like to publicly acknowledge and thank him and his staff for the tremendous work that is involved with preparing and adopting this housing element. This has been a multi-year long process. The document that we have developed and put before the Planning Commission earlier this week and City Council is fairly extensive. There's a lot of new programs to address the housing needs of our community, and they're fairly aggressive. And I'd like to just acknowledge him and thank him and his staff, as well as the consultants. We have some top-notch consultants who are very well respected in their fields. And it is a pleasure working with them as well. And I typically don't say that because I'm a firm believer that consultants, you thank them by paying their invoice. But these two consultants are just absolutely outstanding. We thank them for their assistance. With that in mind, I'm going to pass it over to our Community Development Director, Mr. Turner, who's going to begin the presentation with the first part. Mr. Turner?
Thank you, City Manager Benoon, and good evening, council members. Stephen Turner, your Community Development Director. Very pleased to be able to bring forward the staff recommendations for the housing element and the safety element update. As City Manager Benoon mentioned, this has been a multi-year effort, not only by city staff and our consultants, but by the community as well. We've asked a lot of our community to help inform the goals, policies, and programs that Newark would be implementing over the next 8 years to develop more housing in our city and in a way where it is safe and in the appropriate locations. So the work of our staff, our consultants, and the community really have brought us to this point this evening. So we're very pleased to be able to make this presentation and give the staff recommendation tonight. So a little bit of the agenda. I'm going to be providing an overview of the housing and safety elements, as well as an overview plan. The general plan, of course, is the guiding document for the city with regards to our goals, policies, and programs. We'll go ahead and take a pause. We'll take a look at the sites list and then accommodate any recusals and then ask for specific approvals on certain sites. Once we complete that exercise, then we will continue on with the staff presentation. I'll hand it over to our consultants to provide an overview of the housing element for the next 8 years, for the years 2023 to 2031, as well as an overview of our updates to our natural hazards element, which is going to be called the safety element. We'll then present the staff recommendation and then give some next steps from there. So presenting tonight, in addition to myself, are Paul Penninger, principal from Bay Area Economics, Christy Wang, principal with Community Planning Collaborative, and then from Environmental Science Associates, who was the firm that helped us with the safety element update, we'll have Grace Nelson and Shannon Wages. So just starting from a very high level, a very big picture, just wanted to give an overview again of our general plan, which was adopted in 2013. As you know, it's the plan that really provides our long-term vision, goals, policies, and actions for a 20-year period. 2023 represents kind of the midway point, our 10-year anniversary since we adopted the general plan, and it has served us very well. It's a document that staff in my office use if not daily, certainly multiple times a week. All of the recommendations that staff brings to you needs to be consistent with the goals, policies, and programs contained within the general plan. And so we work hard to make sure that the projects and the actions and the recommendations that we're bringing to you are consistent with the city's long-term plan. It, as we mentioned, provides the framework for all of the planning and development decisions that we bring to the council. It also identifies the priorities of the city, certainly through goals, and it helps guide the capital improvement program over the period of the general plan as well. So the general plan contains a number of chapters or elements. They include land use, transportation, housing, conservation and sustainability, environmental hazards, parks, recreation, and open space. And those are the required elements per state law that a general plan must have. All cities in California need to have an adopted general plan, and it must contain these mandatory chapters or elements. In Newark, we have 3 other elements that we have also included. Economic development, really taking a look at sort of the business conditions and making sure that our business community is served well. Community services and facilities looks at all of the kind of the universe of service that we provide to our community, as well as the facilities that help make those services happen. And then health and wellness, so making sure that Newark over the long term is a safe and healthy place in order to live and to work. And so for tonight, of course, we're going to be focusing on the housing element and the environmental hazards element, again, which would be renamed safety. So our housing element is a plan that really, at its very basic level, addresses the housing that's needed in our community. You'll hear a lot of details and a lot of goals and policies and programs that we are proposing that will fulfill that need over the next 8 years. But certainly that in a very basic sense, it really focuses on the housing that's needed in the community. As you know, cities don't build the housing, but we do create the rules and the conditions about where that housing should go, how much, and how it really should be developed. And so everything within the housing element is meant to facilitate and incentivize the goals, policies, and programs that we have to provide more housing in the community. As I mentioned, it's required by state law, and this is the only element of the general plan that needs to get approval by the state of California. Although we do need to have a general plan, there's really no approval or adopting body besides the city council that adopts a general plan. But the housing element is unique in that it does need to be certified by the State Department of Housing and Community Development. It has to be updated every 8 years, and that's the process that we're in now. And that is the general overview. In terms of RHNA, actually go back to the other slide, RHNA is really the target in terms of the number of units that we need to plan for over that 8-year period. And so how did kind of that RHNA number, where did that come from? Well, the state of California assigned our region, the Bay Area region, over 441,000 units that the region needs to plan for. It's based on population and other factors. And then through a specific methodology process over the past 3 years, that 441,000 housing units was carved up and divided amongst all of the Bay Area jurisdictions through a type of process. For Newark, our share or allocation was 1,874 units. That represents about a 70% increase over the existing housing element cycle. Although that is a large number, it's not as large as some of our neighboring jurisdictions that experienced hundreds, if not multiple hundreds of percents increase. A lot of those jurisdictions have high access to jobs and opportunity in transit, and that is really where the bulk of the housing really should go, in those areas that are well served by existing housing, jobs, and transit. In Newark, we certainly have access to jobs and have opportunity areas for sure, but we don't have a lot of transit. And so I think that's one of the reasons why our number was kind of more moderate as compared to other cities that had high quality transit. So again, we need to plan for 1,874 units, and you'll see how we do that within the housing element itself. Just kind of comparing and diving a little bit deeper into that RHNA number, we need to plan for 1,874 units, but we also really need to plan for it through a range of incomes, from very low to low, moderate, and above moderate. And you'll see the distribution that was assigned to Newark for each of those income. We also compare it to Alameda County and the Bay Area to kind of show and demonstrate that the distribution of units that we would need to plan for is fairly consistent between Newark, Alameda County, and the Bay Area. So a little bit about the timeline. As the city manager mentioned, we've been at this for a few years, and the first part of our work was really focused on the community and gaining public input so that we could begin to craft the goals, policies, and programs that best serve our community. Starting earlier this year, we were able to put together a draft of the housing element and release it for a 30-day public review period. During that time, we held a planning commission meeting to provide them an update of the overview and the process of the housing element. And we held a community workshop in March virtually to tell the community a little bit more about our housing element update, what's included in it, and get some feedback on initial policies and programs that we had. In April, we sent our initial draft to the state for a 90-day review. And the state, again, the Department of Housing and Community Development, is responsible for reviewing and certifying it. And so we work closely with HCD staff to review the document, answer questions, and get feedback that we were able to put in other revisions of the document. In July, we received a formal response from HCD that had a long list of changes and revisions that they asked us to make in order to be more consistent with state law. We submitted a second revision to them, kind of the second try, to see how we did. We did much better, so that long list was whittled down to, I think the long list may have been like 8 or 9 pages, and now we're down to 4 or 5 pages of comments. But essentially, we feel very confident that the housing element that is in front of you tonight is consistent with state housing law. We will continue to work with the state over the next 2 months to refine the housing element and make non-substantial changes in order to be consistent and get that certification from the state. And we expect to have that by the end of December of this year. And then just very briefly, the other element that we'll be talking about tonight is the safety element, currently called natural hazards. Again, it is one of our general plan elements. It has goals, policies, and actions to protect the community from unreasonable environmental risks. It was originally adopted in 2013 with the general plan, but it hasn't been analyzed or changed since then. So this was a good opportunity to do that. Also, state law requires us to update the safety element as well every time we update the general plan. And the local hazard mitigation plan that we're also preparing fits very nicely into the update of the safety element as well. So before we get into a very sort of deep dive of the housing element and then later on in the safety element, we did want to take a pause, kind of introduce the housing sites list, but also kind of visually the map of those sites. and as an initial action, have the city council members being able to recuse themselves from certain sites so that we can then as a group come back and review and adopt or consider adoption of the housing element. So I think with that, I'm going to hand it back to the mayor.
Sure, so at this time, folks, what we're doing is we're gonna kind of break it up, all the various locations that we've identified as future potential housing sites. And we're gonna look at List A, and in this particular case, the vice mayor will need to recuse herself from further discussion on this item only. Vice Mayor?
I have to recuse myself because I have real property interest and business interests, source of income in the Mexico Tortilla Factory at 7015 Thornton Avenue and rental properties at 7155, 7167, 7179 in proximity to Site 9. I have real property interest and business interest in rental property at 36805 Magnolia Street in proximity to Site 28. APN 922410. And I am not buying any more properties till I'm not on city council anymore. Since I have to recuse myself, is it okay if I go into the parking lot instead of into the room?
Yes.
Okay.
So, Mr. Turner, for those in the audience and those that are observing online, this is a map of List A, which includes a number of parcels within that group. Is that a correct representation?
That's correct.
Thank you. So I will now open the public hearing as to housing site List A only. After the public hearing, the council will take action to provide a final direction and will not reopen or reconsider housing site List A. So is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak to this specific location? Council colleagues, any questions or comments regarding Site A? Seeing none, I will now close the public hearing. Is there a motion to approve the housing sites List A of the housing element of the general plan for the period 2023-2031? By Councilmember Bucci.
Second.
By Councilmember Jorgens. Please vote. And that passes. I'm sorry, I didn't vote, I guess. How did that happen?
You were here, though.
Oh, you're too fast for me, Your Honor. I need to recuse Councilmember Collazo.
I'm sorry. It's okay. We ready?
I hope so.
And that passes unanimously with 4 ayes and Vice Mayor Collazo recusing herself. Just wait one moment for the Vice Mayor to return. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Now we'll go ahead and, Mr. Turner, side B.
Yes, similarly, this is a map of Old Town, highlighting 3 particular sites within Old Town where Councilmember Freitas may be recused.
Has to be recusing to identify the following properties: real property interest and business interest in rental property at 37220 Magnolia Street in the proximity of sites 12 and 21. And real property interest and business interest in rental property at 7978-7972 Thornton Avenue in the proximity to site 28.
We'll see you soon, my friend.
Thank you.
Any further comments from staff on this?
No comments, Tim.
Thank you. So I will now open the public hearing as it relates to list B only. After the public hearing, the council will take action to provide final direction and will not reopen or reconsider housing site list B. Would anyone in the audience like to speak to this item? The public hearing is now closed. Council comments, questions? Yes, Councilmember Bucci.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick comment. You know, I don't want anybody out there who's watching this to think that our lack of questions around these maps indicates some sort of lack of interest. We have been working on this stuff for weeks, and we've had multiple meetings with staff, and we have some of these maps memorized at this point. So it's not from lack of interest. We are just really on top of this. So, okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Bucci.
It's a long presentation coming, yeah.
Any further comments, questions? Thank you. I need a motion and a second on this site, this B. So moved. By Councilmember Bucci.
Second.
Vice Mayor Collazo seconds. Please vote. And that passes unanimously, 4 ayes, with Councilmember Freitas recusing himself. We will now proceed with the remainder of the item, excluding housing sites lists A and B. The public hearing is now open to consider adoption of the 2023-2031 housing element and safety element of the city of Newark. Oh, did I go a little bit too fast on that?
No, that's our apologies. It looks like we're having some technological difficulties. If we could just take a moment. No, it was fine here. It wasn't fine up there. Okay. So at this point, Your Honor, we'd like to proceed with the balance of the staff report. So, Mr. Turner.
Thank you, City Manager. At this point, we will go into a much more detailed presentation about the housing element. So with that, I'll introduce Christy Wang from Community Planning Collaborative to provide this portion of the presentation.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here. We've, Paul has been working on this for quite some time with your team, and I just want to say I think it's really been a joy to work with a community and a council and a planning commission and staff that are very pro-housing, and just a pleasure to work with. So thank you for the opportunity. So I'm going to walk through the overview of what's included in the housing element and touch on a lot of the analysis that went into the plan. And then Paul will go into a little deeper dive on the programs and the work that will lie ahead for you and your staff in the next 8 years. And he will also talk a bit more about sites and the methodology that went into that sites inventory. This list above, the list above includes the categories of things which are required by state law for us to include, and in addition to much more than that, but I'll go through each of the bullets one by one. So next slide. Community engagement, just wanted to start off with how did we come up with the goals and the priorities in this plan? It comes from the community, it comes from this body, it comes from the Planning Commission, and the team really worked hard to get out there and talk to people in the community as well as holding specific meetings. So we have a website, publicized things on social media. There was a community survey done online that got a good set of responses. And then also going out to meet people where they are. So the Family Day, going to the public library, the senior center, and then also invited in some groups and individuals for one-on-one interviews and listening sessions. Next slide. We heard a lot of wonderful feedback about people really appreciating the community of Newark, people wanting to be able to stay in Newark, and then a lot of concerns about their ability to remain, not to be displaced, a lot of concern about their neighbors and people, especially with very low incomes, people who are experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness, a lot of interest in trying to meet the needs of people who have special needs in the community. Also some interest in wanting to plan for climate change and be thoughtful about the future. Next slide. Just wanted to share a few direct quotes from people that we heard from the survey or from people in person. Again, just concern about and interest in meeting the needs for seniors and people with disabilities and people with very low incomes, and sort of overriding concerns about affordability and displacement. Next slide. And these all informed the priorities and the goals for the housing element overall. So the next part of the housing element is a lot of analysis and data about existing housing needs in Newark. So that covers both the people, who lives here in Newark, what are their incomes, how old are they, what are their needs, what race and ethnicity are they, language they speak. It talks about, we go into the housing stock. What's the condition of the housing stock? What are people paying for it? And what, both for renters and for homeowners. And then also looking at trends. Next slide. I guess I would just say, big picture, Newark is growing. It is becoming more diverse, and there are many people with special housing needs in the community, particularly, I would say, seniors. Next, so yes, trends. So we also looked at how trends over time. Newark is again growing, both from a household's perspective, the number of jobs that are here in Newark, the number of housing units. Newark has been doing a good job. I think Director Turner did mention that in the last housing element cycle, you did exceed the overall number that you were needing to meet. And that is not the case in many communities throughout the Bay Area or the state of California. So kudos. And I would note that over 30% of residents of households in Newark spend more than 30% of their income on housing, which is the standard for what we consider to be affordable. Next slide. So the next portion of the analysis that went into this was looking at affirmatively furthering fair housing, which is a mouthful, but is really, it is a deep dive into how the city needs to take action to address disparities throughout the community that result from past patterns of segregation and think about how to make more inclusive communities within Newark. So this is required by state law. We looked at a number of things that are specifically required and I think went beyond, thinking about segregation and integration, access to opportunity, the number of fair housing complaints, where are the needs in this community? And that is both looking at where can you improve quality of life for residents in lower income parts of Newark, as well as supporting access to high opportunity parts of Newark. Next slide. So this section looks at both the sort of underlying data, and then it also makes connections to the plan for the next 8 years, the programs that we will need to work on, and then also where do you site this housing. So this map up here with all of the sites in the sites inventory mapped with access to transit and access to higher resource neighborhoods. So the blue at the time of this map are showing the higher resource neighborhoods, and green are moderate resource. And that just, well, I'm not going to go into detail here, but really we had to think a lot about how do we make sure that we're placing housing, we're not concentrating low-income housing in certain communities, we are making sure that people have access to the amenities that you have in this community. Next slide. The next portion was the constraints section, and this is one that we've spent a lot of time working with the state on addressing their questions. They are very eager to make sure that every community is addressing the barriers to housing and barriers to access to housing within their community. And so governmental constraints are the things that the city has more control over. And so we had a lot of dialogue about laying out all of the processes in Newark, what is in the general plan, what is in specific plans, what's the zoning, what are the development standards, parking requirements, open space requirements, how long does it take to get through the permitting process, and how much does it cost to pay all your fees and get through all these steps. So this is a very extensive section that we've also amended a number of times, and I think learned a lot from the process. This section also acknowledges some of the constraints that are not within the city's purview, so availability of financing, thinking about interest rates, land costs and construction costs in the community. What are some of the environmental constraints about where you can site housing and where it's good to have housing for people? Next slide. So this is where we get into the meat of the document, talking about the goals and policies, and then Paul will talk about the programs that will implement them. So the goals are sort of the overriding aims that Newark is setting out to solve in the coming cycle and beyond. And then we have policies to support those goals, and that's again what Director Turner talked about earlier in terms of referencing all of their work goes back to the policies that are in the general plan. And then the programs are the specific ordinances to pass, the programs to institute, the actions that the city's going to take to implement those. So I'm going to go through each of the goals and share a little bit about the policies that underlie them. Next. So preserving and improving existing housing. This really comes out of the community engagement work and people's interest in both in supporting keeping the housing stock in good condition and preserving the affordability for people, both renters and homeowners. Next slide. The second goal is to facilitate the development of more homes for more people. And so this is a large bucket of policies, not just the development of multifamily housing, which Newark has done already, but also expanding into creating more opportunities for missing middle housing, which Paul will talk about in more detail, continuing to support accessory dwelling units, looking to more partnerships with educational institutions and other public agencies, and supporting housing for vulnerable populations, including people who are at risk of homelessness. Next slide. So third one is reducing and removing constraints to affordable housing development. So again, this is addressing people's interest in making sure that housing is affordable to people throughout the community. And these are really focused on the increasing certainty in the process, streamlining the process, and generally ensuring that the zoning is suitable to make affordable housing possible in the community. Next slide. So the fourth one is helping people stay in their homes and communities. And again, this is a theme that came out through all the community engagement. So creating programs that support both homeowners and tenants to remain in the community. And then also another policy to focus on partnerships with institutions, nonprofits, and private landowners to ensure that there's housing for all levels of the community. Next slide. The fifth goal is to increase access to affordable housing, and this one is really building on the affordable housing work plan that we already have underway and which we are eager to get back to once this housing element is approved by the state. So I think these are all policies and programs that you're familiar with, but continuing to generate funding for affordable housing and putting it out there regularly to the affordable housing community, developing a home ownership program for lower income households, especially first-time home buyers, and prioritizing the use of city-owned property when it is determined to be surplus. And lastly,
Just a quick comment, if I may, for those that are watching at home. If you can go back to the last slide, there's a couple acronyms I want people to know what they mean. BIPOC.
Yes, so that's Black, Indigenous, and persons of color.
Okay, thank you. And then on this slide, that you have, the next slide, I'm sorry.
Oh, BMR is
Yes.
below market rate.
I just want to make sure for those that are watching at home that they know what those acronyms mean. Thank you.
Yes, sorry, that's not spelled out on there. And then the last one, which is already something we've identified as a priority for the Affordable Housing Work Plan, which is amending the existing inclusionary housing ordinance to require incentivized on-site production of units and not just fees. Next slide. So the next one is enhancing quality of life and addressing equity and environmental justice. These policies are focused on ensuring that Newark is a high-quality place and environment to be, making sure that we are making it easy for people to walk and bicycle and take transit to their destinations instead of taking a car, and improving the housing stock to make it more energy efficient and water efficient so that the housing is more comfortable, more resilient, and better for the environment. And then also limiting development in areas that are at risk of flooding. Next slide. And the last of the goals is to further fair housing throughout the city. And I would say this one is a common thread throughout all the other goals and policies as well, but really to through education and promoting affordable housing in certain ways to make sure that fair housing is accessible throughout the city to the households that really need it. This also includes anti-displacement measures and support for tenants. So now I will hand it off to Paul to cover programs.
Good evening. It's nice to be here this evening to talk to you about this housing element and specifically about the programs where the city's vision for housing becomes implemented. And so what my colleague has just gone through is a very ambitious and comprehensive outline of goals and policies which represent a vision for housing in Newark, and where those get realized is through the implementation of these programs. Now, there's many, many programs in this housing element. We're going to highlight now just a few of them that are either especially innovative or new or represent a change over perhaps what's been done in the past. And we want to start with programs around preservation. And this picks up on a theme that we've already heard about this evening, which is that one of the things that we heard in our outreach to the community early on is that folks love Newark, they want to stay here, they value being long-term members of the community, and they would like to stay in their homes and their apartments. So these two programs are about that. They're about helping households achieve that goal. The first one is to create a housing rehabilitation and repair program that will provide grants and/or loans to low-income homeowners and residential landlords to complete repairs that they're not able to do on their own. So it's basically, as time goes on and your house needs more and more repairs, you may not necessarily have the funds to do that if you're a lower income household, say a senior on a fixed income. And so a lot of communities have these kinds of housing rehabilitation and repair programs that provide assistance to homeowners and then in that way allow them to stay in the community. The second program here is developing a citywide rental inspection program to make sure that existing apartment buildings are maintained at a high quality for residents and that renters have access to really high quality housing in Newark. So this is an inspection program that would be implemented by staff over the course of the first, second period of the housing element. We're dividing these into kind of 3 different tranches of early programs, middle programs, and later programs over the course of the 8 years. So not all of these will be done all at once by Director Turner's staff, but rather in stages in a way that's achievable. But this one is really about making sure that existing rental assets are maintained at a really high quality for renter households. Next slide, please. Second set of programs we wanted to highlight are around what we call middle housing, or sometimes missing middle housing. And these are housing types that used to be legal in most California communities, and then over time became really difficult for homeowners and small-scale residential landlords to develop. So these are things like duplexes or quadplexes or small-scale apartment buildings up to 10 units. They're also accessory dwelling units, so second units that you might have in back of your house for an extended family or to generate a little additional income. And these programs also are in response to state laws, which have been passed over the past few years, which require communities to allow things like urban lot splits or duplexes on existing residential lots, and to set forth objective design standards. So you have to comply with state law, SB 9 and SB 10, for example, that require local regulations to permit middle housing types, duplexes and urban lot splits. But what these programs do, H21 and H28 specifically, is to set forth how the city's going to respond to those state requirements and prepare objective design standards that facilitate that type of development in a way that's also consistent with the city's goals. Program H22 here is again about accessory dwelling units, sometimes called second units. In the olden days, when I first started working in planning, we called them granny flats. That is no longer allowed, but it does reflect the idea that sometimes it's for your parents or grandparents or extended family that you want to create an additional opportunity. Next slide, please. The next set of programs is around special needs housing. So we did identify a lot of interest in the community in providing more housing options for different special needs populations, and looking at your demographic data, also specific groups that had higher housing problems or a higher incidence of housing problems than other groups. So I'm just going to highlight a few of these programs. There's quite a few programs dealing with special housing needs in the housing element. The first one that I'd like to highlight is developing a local response to people experiencing homelessness. Now, you've already done a lot in Newark as a community to address the needs of people who are experiencing homelessness or who are at risk of homelessness. This program is putting forth a comprehensive approach specific to Newark around people experiencing homelessness. I think we just heard from the state senator about the number of people in Alameda County who experience homelessness on any given night. Some of those folks live in Newark, are residents of Newark, and are experiencing housing insecurity, and this program is meant to address that. Program H210 is around supporting the development of single-room occupancy units. So one way that some communities have been successful in addressing housing needs for people who are facing housing problems is through allowing smaller size units, what are sometimes called SRO units, sometimes even micro units. But it's basically supporting the development of SRO and comparable units to provide an alternative living option that's perhaps more affordable, maybe easier to develop, and can address that part of the housing need. And then finally, we wanted to talk about this program H47, which is for people who are severely developmentally disabled. So in a past generation, people with profound developmental disabilities would often, very frequently, go live in residential campuses. So the one for this region that people might be familiar with is the Agnews campus in Santa Clara County, which is now closed. But those residential campuses, which used to house folks with severe developmental disabilities, have largely now been closed in favor of providing housing opportunities for people throughout the community. So what the research has shown and the practice has shown is that people with severe developmental disabilities tend to thrive and do better in community housing situations than they do in residential campuses. And there are indeed nonprofits and government programs which help support providing this type of housing for people with severe developmental disabilities. So this program is about making sure that those housing types are also permitted and facilitated in Newark, and that people with those types of disabilities have a place to call home in Newark. Next slide, please. So the longest list of programs in the housing element has to do with addressing governmental constraints to housing production and preservation. And a lot of these are directly in response to comments that we've received from the State Housing and Community Development Department. Some of them are in response to feedback that we got during the community outreach process. Some of them are in response to feedback that we've gotten from the City Council or the Planning Commission or from staff. I want to go through just a few of them, the ones that are probably, that you might represent a change over the way that things have been done in the past and would be of interest to the council and to the public. The first is H31, which is around streamlining ministerial approval. So this is providing more authority for staff to permit certain types of housing. H32 is developing objective design standards for single family and multifamily developments and infill housing. As I mentioned before, you know, the state legislature has passed a number of laws which says that, you know, which essentially require Newark to approve different housing types, but you can establish objective design standards that say that, okay, these are the design standards that you must comply with in order to get your project through our process in Newark. And these design standards need to be clear, objective, understandable, but they can be very much in line with what you want as a community rather than what the state HCD or other government agencies want. So H32 is about developing objective design standards both for multifamily development and single family homes. H33 is about assessing and updating your fees as they relate to residential development to make sure that you're not imposing fees that are a burden or a constraint on residential development. We looked as part of this housing element at your fees compared to fees in neighboring jurisdictions and did not find that your fees were a constraint or even especially high. So, you know, I think this is a program that HCD likes to see in housing elements to make sure that on an ongoing basis you're assessing this. As of right now, we don't think that the fees, residential impact fees in Newark constitute a special constraint on development. Program H34 is about adjusting zoning to allowing mixed uses, meaning commercial and residential in current commercial zones. So it's basically making more land available for residential development in more parts of the city in commercial CMU and C zones. And then finally, program H35 is about parking standards. So one of the things that we heard as feedback from the state and indeed from residential developers is that structured parking, meaning covered parking, can often be a major cost constraint on new development, and that high parking standards imposed by local jurisdictions on new development can represent a constraint that can often be a make or break factor in projects moving forward. So what this program does is to say that the city is going to prepare a study, look at current parking standards, update those parking standards based on the results of the study, and commit in the process of doing that to reducing the required covered parking or structured parking for multifamily residential development. So this would be, taking the current requirement and reducing it in order to help facilitate residential development by building more apartments and fewer parking spaces. So this is something that, not just Newark is doing. Every single California community is updating their housing element, including other communities that don't have rich transit services are also in the process of rethinking this. And so it goes hand in hand with thinking through things like bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, car sharing, all sorts of other transit mode alternatives that provide people with alternatives for moving around without a private occupancy vehicle. Also, you know, it's a long-term plan. It's a long-term strategy, so it's not all going to happen at once, and there'll be opportunities along the way to revisit what actually works in terms of parking standards. Next slide, please. Partnerships in public lands. Another really exciting opportunity that we heard about early on as we were doing the affordable housing work plan process is the ability of Newark to partner with neighboring, with other public agencies like the Newark Unified School District, but also others to leverage public land to build much needed workforce housing and affordable housing for local residents and indeed for employees of public agencies. So programs H26 and H53 are really about the city exploring ways to use its own resources to leverage public land to build affordable housing and to partner with the school district and other public agencies to do that. So, you know, if you control the lands and you're able to use that as leverage to partner with private developers, you have a lot more control over the type of development that happens and the affordability levels that get built into that development. So using your land assets strategically over time and partnering with other, you know, other public agencies that also have land assets and needs for workforce housing is one way that cities are really successfully addressing housing need across the state and across the country. Next slide, please. A few other really important programs that we wanted to point out to you are about anti-displacement and tenant support. So one of the things that, you know, has occurred over the last couple economic cycles is that a lot of renters have experienced problems with evictions or with not being able to afford rent increases, or feeling that they're not able to maintain a place in the community because of changes that are taking place in their neighborhoods. So these programs, H41 through H46, develop anti-displacement programs specifically for the Old Town specific plan area. Also, a just cause eviction ordinance that will be put in place. More connecting residents to existing shared housing programs and existing housing programs generally. One of the things that we heard was, you know, there are programs in the Tri-City area and in Alameda County for low-income renter households. And sometimes people just don't know how to access them. They don't know how, they really just don't know where to go. It's one of the things we heard very frequently in our community outreach. How do we actually better connect people with existing resources, including with shared housing options? And that's H45 is in part trying to do that. Program H46 is also supporting tenant stability by requiring minimum lease terms and relocation assistance in the event of eviction. So all of these programs in this category are really about anti-displacement and tenant support and giving people the opportunity to stay in Newark if they want to. Next slide, please. A key program that we've already been working on, that you've already been supporting, is through ensuring an adequate amount of affordable housing through 3 distinct programs. One is through applying the state density bonus law. Another is through the affordable housing fee program, so you collect fees from commercial and residential developments that go into an affordable housing fund that you in turn use to support housing development. And then finally, requiring the production of units in new residential development to offset the impacts on the market. And so one of the things that we've talked about as part of the affordable housing work plan and that's been carried forward into this housing element is to update the city's inclusionary housing policies to require on-site production and new development and to take a fresh look at the feasibility of how many units could be required for different types of development and how that could be applied as part of a new policy that would ensure not just fees get paid into a fund, but actual units get built. Next slide, please. Okay. Very importantly, first-time homebuyer programs. So we want to move forward with designing a below-market rate homeownership program and down payment assistance plan, and in particular, affirmatively market that plan to Black, Indigenous, and people of color households. So residents with low ownership rates, lower income residents, and communities that have not had access to home ownership in the past. So this is a very important program and one that is identified as being a short-term priority in the housing element. Next slide, please. All right, here are our sites. You've already seen this map. The programs are meant to facilitate housing production of all types, and many of them also apply to these specific sites. So the city has identified sufficient sites to accommodate 1,874 units being built during the planning period across income levels for all types of households with all types of special needs, and in particular identifying housing in places that are high opportunity with rich community services and amenities. So this is the list of sites. You've seen them. You may have questions about them in the Q&A. We're glad to take those. But I want to just feature or describe a couple of the sites, or I think just one this evening, in our approach to thinking about the feasibility of redeveloping this site during the planning period. So the profiled site that I'm going to talk about is Site 18 in the inventory. It's the current EZ8 motel. And one thing that I think is unique about this housing element and sets Newark apart from many other jurisdictions is that there's no rezoning here. You're not taking any sites and doing a zoning code amendment, a wholesale zoning code amendment to upzone sites or rezone sites to a different zoning category. We've tried to choose sites that already had zoning, which would facilitate housing development consistent with one of the 3 area plans that contain most of the housing, so Old Town, Bayside, Newark, and New Park Place, or are in the general plan. So this is a site that represents that. So this is already zoned as residential high density, even though it's a current lodging use. The zoning is actually residential high density. The general plan land use designation is also high density residential. It's 2.24 acres. It has allowable density up to 60 dwelling units to the acre. And looking at what's happening in the broader market area, a lot of properties like this in Alameda County and the Bay Area in general are redeveloping as residential land uses as the market changes. So we think this would be a good site. Now, of course, the owner of the hotel, the property owner, would have to come forward with a proposal, and Newark can set the stage for this, can create the opportunity for facilitating the development of this site, but it will ultimately be up to the property owner and to a developer partner to make this happen. And I think with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Turner.
Yes, thank you very much. So as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we've had a number of draft housing element revisions reviewed by the state. Most recently, our latest version was reviewed and received a comment letter from them on October 16th. So they've asked us to make further revisions to the housing element that didn't make it into the version that is within your packet tonight. So we wanted to talk a little bit about those items, and as part of the staff recommendation, we'll be recommending that City Council incorporate these revisions into the next version of the housing element. So we'll start off with some adjustments to the proposed programs, including program H2.2 for accessory dwelling units. We updated that with a timeline for compliance, and that we will revise our ADU requirements in the municipal code in 2024. Program H2.3 deals with Four Corners, and the state feels that although we are not identifying specific housing sites within the Four Corners area or in the northern portion of Newark, the state wants us to see that we consider the Four Corners area as a possible mixed-use development area. So maintaining the commercial that's there, very critical, of course. It is Newark's primary neighborhood serving commercial area. We definitely don't want to lose that, but we feel that there are opportunities for residential development in that area, particularly with the redevelopment or the rethinking of the Ardenwood station, which would become multimodal under the South Bay Connect proposal. So the Capital Corridor would be essentially rerouted through Ardenwood as it makes its way north from and to Santa Clara and San Jose. So that will become an important station and create some opportunities for residential development very close to a high-quality transit station. And so the state wanted us to have a quantitative objective for housing within the Four Corners area. And so we've modified that program to include a target of 360 units on existing commercial properties. It doesn't say where. We would want to go through a community planning process. We would take a look at our existing Four Corners area plan, engage with the community, engage with property owners, and come up with a plan that we would then bring to the Planning Commission and City Council in the future to show how we can adjust the Four Corners area plan to include a mix of uses. At this time, we're not committing to housing on any particular site or location, but we are committing at least a plan for a numerical standard of 360 units. Moving on to the parking
Stephen, just a quick comment again for those that are listening online. Could you identify the Four Corners area a little bit more for those that are watching in terms of where that is, what's currently on those sites?
Sure, it's the key kind of shopping area for Newark Boulevard and I believe Jarvis, and that there are four essentially commercial areas that anchor that corner, providing a wide range of shopping and services for the community. So a very important part of our community in terms of commercial development. We've had a number of retail vacancies in that area, namely the Mi Pueblo site and the Osh site, but we've also had some successes, particularly with Sprouts and other types of uses that are there. So that is the geographical area of Four Corners that we're talking about. Moving on to program H3.5, the parking standards and update, as Paul mentioned, we are going to be looking and studying and amending our parking standards. We originally had a date of 2024. We'd like to push that out to 2025. We believe that this would be a fairly controversial plan and one that we would want to engage the community in a very meaningful way, and that takes time. And we have a lot to do to implement other portions of this plan for sure. So we're going to be requesting a year extension for implementing the program.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Can I jump in with a question here?
Sure.
What if we don't make an adjustment to the parking standards? What if we make the other adjustments that the state would like to see, but in the end, we don't make those parking adjustments?
Right. We report our progress to the state on all of our housing production as well as our work to meet the programs within the housing element. So we can certainly say we're working on these programs, we're not working on other ones, and it's the state that would really come to us and say, City, why haven't you implemented program H3.5? We will come back with a response. Ultimately, the state may find that we're out of compliance with the housing element because we haven't proceeded with H3.5. So that could be a determination, and they would say in order to become in compliance with state housing law that you need to implement H3.5.
Sure, but there's been cities who during the last and I know this time the state says that they're gonna have teeth and they're really gonna enforce it. But in the past they haven't, and we have cities that haven't built barely any houses and they haven't faced anything. So again, we've already lowered the parking standards. The state did it. Shout out to our senator who was just here who voted no on decreasing the parking standards. But I think doing this is just another great example of how the city becomes the dumping ground for bad legislation from the state. Because the fact of the matter is we don't have BART. Our AC transit service sucks. And the AC transit service, just so everybody here is clear, is so bad in South County that they made us a whole different district so they could fund us less. So we already have parking issues. Look at a bunch of the projects that have been approved and developed, and when you drive through them, half of the curb is red, right? Because it's all tight and it's packed in. People park all over the place and can't get close to their house. It has been an issue for our police dealing with some of those folks. It is an issue if you want to come home with groceries and you have to park 100 or 200 yards from your house, or you have to double park with your emergencies on. It's terrible. It's terrible what they're trying to force down our throat with the parking standards. It's ridiculous. It's not fair. And, you know, I will circle back to what I said earlier about some of the investment firms and hedge funds buying 1 in every 3 houses that go up for sale in California last year. Let's not focus on that. Let's focus on our parking standards as being a restriction to house building. It's ridiculous. It is. And I will say that I threw a big fit about this, and that's the reason it got pushed out to the mid-range. And I'm not happy with the parking standards. I don't care how much outreach we do to people in town. They're not going to like it when we start showing them the numbers that the states want us to go with. And it's not right that we don't have a good public transportation system here, and we're beholden to one of 30 different systems in the 9 Bay Area counties, and they expect us to what? Catch the one bus that comes through every hour and take it to BART? It's ridiculous. What can they really do to us if we don't do it? They haven't done anything to anybody who haven't built houses. We've met our RHNA goals. Us and Dublin are one of the only 2 cities that are actually actively meeting those goals and trying to do what we're supposed to do. Other cities just ignore this stuff, right? Or they go to court and fight it. And here we are. And we had this conversation. And I know that staff told me, well, you know, when developers build places and they understand that they need to have a certain amount of parking to sell it, and, you know, they're going to want to make sure that people still want to live there. That's not the reality of the situation. The reality of the situation is that they will always do the bare minimum. Fact. Because they want to maximize their profits. They don't care about it because they build a place and they sell them and they move on, and it's not their problem. It becomes our problem. I don't understand how they can keep forcing that down. And I will call out Senator Scott Wiener, who grew up in San Francisco, is a San Francisco guy, and is the one who has tried to put forward where there should be no parking standards for developments. And that's great for him because in his reality, in his experience, he's in San Francisco where you have Muni and you have lots of taxis and you have BART and you have plenty of options to get where you need to go. And that's not the reality for us here. So I know this isn't on you, and I'm kind of dumping it on you, but the reality is that reducing the parking standards further just has a bigger impact on our community. It's a bigger problem for us that the developers don't care about. And if you look around at the developments that have happened here over the last few years, I don't think the parking standards have restricted them at all. Has there been a project that came forward that said, you know what? Your guys' parking standards are a little too high for us, so we've decided not to do a project here in Newark with you guys. Is there one example of that? No. Okay, thank you.
I certainly appreciate your passion on this issue, Councilmember Bucci, and it sounds like what you're suggesting is that you're not pleased that the state continues to pass on these requirements to local governments without considering the ultimate impact on that local government. But the main issue that we need to strive for tonight is to get this housing element adopted and approved at the state level, so we're not subject to other consequences that may or may not occur down the road if we're found to be not in compliance. I don't know if there was additional comments you wanted to make, Mr. Turner?
No additional comments. Essentially, it is staff's responsibility to come back to the Planning Commission and Council and show how we're going to meet and be consistent with the program. Certainly, I think there are options, right? We can look at the numerical requirements that the state is asking us to reduce our parking, but are there other ways where we can meet the intent of the program and achieve the same results without having to reduce the parking in a substantial way. So that is a challenge that I think staff is eager to take on. We know I think staff would certainly agree with the comments made from Commissioner Abuchi, or Councilmember Abuchi. So it'll be on us to try to look for creative ways, if not meet the specific requirement of the program, but look at the intent and try to get the same results as what we're trying to get to.
Yeah, it's really a challenge for city staff, and I recognize the difficulty that you have because in essence, where local governments have the opportunity to look at any development proposal in the entire scheme of our community in terms of its impacts, the state has made it almost impossible for us to continue to do that by requiring us basically to take that square peg and fit it into a circle. I recognize the challenge. We recognize the need for more housing. We recognize the need for more affordable housing. We all support that up here. But the state has been blind, in my opinion, as well, to the impacts that some of this is creating on local governments. And we have done, as Councilmember Abuchi has mentioned, we've done our fair share of housing here in the city, and we've continued to make affordable housing a priority in this community, and will continue to make affordable housing a priority. But the state continues to come down with these mandates that make it much more difficult to advise our residents, why are we building this or allowing this to be built when it's going to create an impact on my neighborhood or my community? And really the only real good answer we have is that unfortunately these are not local decisions that are being made, but these are decisions that are being made at the state level that we are mandated to perform. So it does make it a challenge for us. And the nice thing about it, Councilmember Abuchi, is these developments come forward and staff will look at other opportunities to meet our current parking requirements with innovation and opportunity at that level as well. So we'll have an opportunity to at least get into that discussion as those developments come forward.
Certainly. I mean, I think with every challenge comes an opportunity and an opportunity to be innovative. And I think that knowing what Newark needs and what the community needs, it will be a very interesting challenge, but a great opportunity, I think, for city staff to implement these programs in a way that works best for our community. And we're looking forward to doing that into the future.
Thank you, Mr. Turner.
Just finishing up with the housing element revisions that we're proposing to Program 410. This is amendments to that program for special needs housing. In particular, the state wants us to look at our definitions of emergency shelter, of family, and to take a look at possible revisions to our reasonable accommodations procedure, which grants waivers for residents who, because of their disabilities, may need some exceptions to the site development regulations in order to improve their living unit in a way that works for them. We feel that our definitions are actually fairly good and do not represent barriers, but the state wants us to take another look at those, and it's relatively straightforward to do so. So we're requesting an amendment for that particular program into the future. We also have 3 new programs that we are proposing, also in consultation with the state. We would like to catalyze the development of small sites through a lot consolidation incentive program. A number of our sites on our housing list are small sites that have multiple property owners, but we have demonstrated in the past the ability to work with property owners to consolidate those sites into a site that could be developed with more housing. And the Saha proposal on Thornton is one of those examples where they were able to work with property owners and purchase, I think, 3 sites, combine them into one to be able to propose about 57 affordable housing units. So we feel that we can do that throughout the community in certain areas, but having a specific program that helps to create an incentive program, I think would be very helpful. So we'll be including that. We'll also include a new program, H2.12, to ensure that maximum residential densities are achievable. You know that each zone district has a maximum density, residential density, number of units per acre that's required, but sometimes our site development regulations like height and setbacks and lot coverage can work against that maximum density. So the state wants us to look at those site development regulations to make sure that they don't represent a barrier or a constraint for developers to achieve the maximum densities as allowed under the existing zoning ordinance. And then finally, yes, program 7.6, which is a monitoring program. So we would monitor our progress towards meeting our RENA goals, reaching out on an annual basis to property owners who are on the list, talking with property owners who are not on this list, to make sure that they know about the incentives and the programs that are available to them that would incentivize perhaps the production of housing on their properties. And so we will reach out to them on a regular basis to talk about the opportunities for them. With that, I'll go ahead and pause just for a bit before we move into the safety element to see if there's any questions or comments from planning commissioners before we move on.
And just a quick question, and I appreciate the fact that you received a new directive from the state regarding the additional items that you just covered. And I know that you had initially submitted our plan back in April, and they responded with comments in July. Was there an opportunity for them to make those comments back in July? Or, I mean, my worry is that as we continue to revise our plan and submit it to the state, that they go back and kind of do a, whoops, we should have mentioned this also. Are we getting comprehensive comments from the state so it's not a continuation of back and forth on the most minor details? Or, for example, on the one of the items that you mentioned, the H22, for example, on the accessory dwelling units, which I have no problem with, but wasn't that something the state could have commented on back in July that we could have incorporated now and not continue to go through these revisions?
Absolutely. And Newark is not alone in this. We've talked to our other colleagues in other jurisdictions, and they often receive additional comments that weren't in a subsequent letter that weren't present in the first letter. So it's not uncommon. I would say we have a good relationship with our HED reviewers. We haven't experienced that a significant amount of new comments coming through. And in our most recent letter that we received from the state, we did confirm that state reviewers, does this represent the kind of the final list of comments that we can get? And they said it is. And so we're relying upon that to continue working with them because they know and share our goal to try to have our housing element certified by the end of the year. And so I think we feel pretty confident that by addressing these comments and perhaps some other comments that might come up over the next few weeks that we can get to a certified element.
You could have stopped my heart from palpitating by just simply indicating we think this might be the last of the comments. So other comments from council members at this point? Yes, Vice Mayor Collazo.
When you mentioned the property lines, would you explain what they're trying to, are they trying to change it so that you can build right up to the property line?
No, they haven't asked us to modify our site development regulations with regards to setbacks. Now, state legislation in some respects reduce mandatory setbacks to a certain point. For instance, ADUs. I think the setbacks for ADUs is about 4 feet, which is less restrictive than what Newark and many other cities have had in the past. So there's some relaxation of site development regulations that way. They haven't mandated that we reduce, for instance, our setbacks or increase our height. They want us to study that to see if locally our current regulations represent a barrier or a constraint to development. So we can do that, but they haven't come back and said, you know, your setbacks are too generous, reduce them. They haven't gone that far.
So, you know, there was a time, I guess, here in Newark where they were building right on the property line. One of the homes that my father bought, he bought it because that home just butted up right to the other parcel that we had. The house is right on the property line. And the duplexes that we have on Dairy Avenue, the neighbor their garage is right at our property line, up to the fence. So there was a time when they could build right on the property line.
Newark traditionally has had a sort of a process to look at those residential subdivisions with a planned development type of project, where kind of the site development regulations are established on a subdivision by subdivision basis. And I have noticed those subdivisions where those homes are built right along the property line. An interesting approach. Not too sure that we would advocate for that today.
No.
But that was the approach sort of taken in the past. But the planned development, planned community allowance can be helpful, but it also sort of reduces certainty in a way to the public when you expect certain site development regulations to be maintained and then a project comes in and varies from that. So we want to perhaps try to move away to the extent that we can and have projects come in that are consistent with our zoning and density and general plan.
Thank you.
Councilmember Jorgens?
Thank you. I also had a question about duplexes. You know, it's Councilmember Vice Mayor Collazo mentioned, you know, we do have many duplexes, especially in Old Town Newark. So it's a type of housing that does feel like Newark in a way. So I think it can be a smart way to bring in affordable housing. You know, there's been a lot of changes in state law when it comes to duplexes. Where we stand right now, are we going to need to change our ordinances to allow that sort of housing to be built? So what action are we going to need to take on that goal?
We'll have to look at that on a sort of a district by district basis and compare that with the requirements of state law and find out where our codes are perhaps inconsistent with the new state legislation. You know, I think that the sort of the market for missing middle housing and those duplexes and triplexes, fourplexes, you know, have I guess perhaps the demand isn't there, or the product type that developers are building just hasn't been there. And that's kind of why it's missing middle, right? They're building a lot of high density residential and then lower density residential in the past in single family neighborhoods, but nothing in sort of in the middle. So I think that's what we're trying to do, is have site development regulations that might incentivize that type of development in more areas of the city, you know, resulting in more units, perhaps smaller units, but also perhaps more affordable. So the short answer is that we'll just have to look at it on a site-by-site basis or district-by-district basis.
And then one further question. At the beginning of the presentation, there was a note that, you know, many residents in Newark feel like they're not living in a neighborhood of opportunity, or that, you know, it could be more opportunity. I know, you know, one of those categories is going to be recreation. We're counting our city parks in there. Are we counting planned parks in there? I'm thinking of the one in the Bayshore neighborhood.
Yeah, I think that we want to expand access to public parks, right? And public parks are those places where the community feels welcome, that they can go and recreate with their friends and their family, and they feel comfortable doing so. Oftentimes in the parks that you see in homeowners associations, they feel like they're sort of insular, like they only belong to the folks that live there. And I think that sort of represents a barrier. So we wouldn't want to rely upon those homeowner association parks and open spaces to contribute or, you know, define kind of an opportunity area for the city. I think we want to put our efforts towards those public spaces where people feel comfortable recreating.
I appreciate you anticipating my next question there. So then my last question here on the objective design standards. Does that just include the buildings themselves, or can we include plants and trees around the area, sidewalks, bike lanes? Is that something that we include in those standards, or is it just the buildings itself?
It's just for the buildings itself. Other off-site improvements, you know, would be and are typically described in Newark, at least, in our area plans and specific plans, like our New Park Place specific plan, Bayside Newark, TOD, our Old Town areas. Those all contain sort of development standards of the public realm, which include things like sidewalks and landscaping and other amenities and things like that. Objective design standards are really focused on the building itself. Some site planning for sure on private property, but I think mostly it is about building and massing, height and finishes, and fenestration, kind of window placement, that type of thing.
Thank you.
Councilmember Freitas?
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Chairman, the site plan you showed earlier, who creates that? It's the city submit to the state, or it's the state, because like the Maury West, it's not included, because you said you only, is the Maury West site former area 4 is not included on this, because you said you only need about 1,874 units. So it's beneficial for like the property owners of the Maury West not to be included, though it's any disadvantages on this? Or?
Sure. Well, the map that you saw is a visualization of the housing sites list, which is also contained within the housing element. It lists 28 sites, along with the development potential that we believe is appropriate or achievable on each of those sites. And then it's broken down further by income group. So it is, in a way, an exercise to show to the state that we have the right general plan land use, zoning, and site development regulations that would, on those particular sites, achieve residential development in an additive way to get us to 1,874 units. So it's really, in a way, a paper exercise to demonstrate that we have the right plans and policies and regulations in place to be able to support the development of those units. But we don't have to build them. And it doesn't mean that if you're not on this list, you can't build housing. If a property owner wants to build housing and the city builds housing, and even if we have to change the zoning and general plan to do so, we still get credit for all of those units that get built.
At a later time.
That's right. We absolutely get to apply them towards our regional housing needs allocation.
Just to okay, thank you.
Councilmember Bucci?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll save some of my comments for the end of this, but I do, going through this, I did not see in the goals or anything from the state a item to develop non-HOA housing. And I'm glad you brought that up, because HOA fees in our city range anywhere from $300 to $600 a month, which I would say is a much bigger impact on affordability and people being able to buy a home than parking ever was. I would like to see personally a goal added in here that we develop non-HOA housing.
I might look to our consultants to see our ability to actually control that. I don't know if that is a typical goal that perhaps other jurisdictions might be utilizing, but that is tends to be a private property matter, and how a community sort of organizes itself to pay for the improvements that are on the community itself, rather than having the local jurisdiction pay for it. So the benefit of an HOA in a organization that controls not only the buildings, but also the driveways, the landscaping, the exterior improvements, all of the HOA fees goes to pay for those improvements, and also utilities. So everything that's kind of below ground, that's on private property, those HOA fees tend to cover those types of improvements, and where the city does not, is not responsible for them. So perhaps an unintended consequences is that the city now becomes responsible for the utilities and the driveways and the exteriors sort of improvements, that could be a financial burden to the city. So maybe I'll ask our consultants to maybe comment on that.
We did manage to go decades without HOAs and to handle it
for certainly
city, right? And I've said this before, that the HOAs create kind of a micro community that isn't included in our community and is, a burden of a cost for people to be here. So to me, it feels a little bit like a cop-out that we don't want to, burden us too much. That's the business of a city, is to pay for some of those things. That's what we're here for. If we just had HOAs all over the place, we would still be here, right? We still have to do things. We can't always pass the burden off onto them. And I think that is become kind of a bad habit for a lot of cities, ours included. Paul?
I'll keep it really simple.
It's nice to see you, Paul.
Hello. Local jurisdictions in California don't have the ability to regulate the formation of homeowners associations. You can provide financial incentives or other resources that could say the infrastructure costs that are covered or maintenance and operations costs that are covered by HOAs, making them unnecessary. And if you're worried about the financial burden on lower or moderate income households, you can provide programs that provide incentives or cost offsets for HOA fees. So that's something that in first-time homebuyer programs, for example, one of the big costs that are often unaccounted for in underwriting are HOA fees, to your point. So we have the experience coming out of the foreclosure crisis of 2008 of really thinking carefully about, okay, if you're a lower or a moderate income household and you have an HOA fee and there's a special assessment and there's a one-time payment, how do you account for that? And so some jurisdictions have put in place programs to help pay for HOA fees and special assessments for lower and moderate income households that are participants in their first-time homebuyer programs as a way of addressing that. And this may be a question for your city attorney. To my knowledge, it's not within the legal purview of local jurisdictions to prohibit the formation of HOAs. You can make them unnecessary and you can work around them, but I don't think you can prohibit them. I wouldn't recommend as your consultant that you include that as a program in this housing element. Perhaps it's a future legislative item to pursue, but not today. That's just my recommendation.
Okay. No, we got to get this done. I get it. But again, this is major impact on people in town. And I can tell you from my experience talking to people, established Newark residents don't like looking at the HOAs, right? And it's all we've built. It's literally all we've built.
I don't necessarily disagree with you on the financial impact that HOA fees create on a home buyer, but at least from the perspective that the buyer is buying into that development, knowing that the HOA fees are there, at least makes it a financial decision on their part as to whether they're going to live in that community or not. And in all honesty, we do charge HOA fees on a citywide basis in some areas when you look at the landscaping and lighting districts that we have. Those are fees we're charging homeowners to maintain the landscaping and the lighting in their districts. Those, in essence, are kind of a citywide HOA fee. Would you not agree? Yeah.
I think so, probably.
That's absolutely a fair point. I think another point is that when you have people in Newark who would like to stay in Newark and they're looking at houses that are being built, because some of the stuff we just talked about was people's insecurity about being able to stay in the town that they love, and the only option they have for houses that are being built is an HOA, it makes it difficult for them to stay here. And when 1/3 of the regular housing stock is being bought up by hedge funds and investment firms, it further cuts down. So our hands are tied at every step of the way, and then we continue to approve HOAs that just further tie people's hands.
Yeah, I think that's why it's important that we continue to develop rental housing for residents who may not be in a position to become first-time home buyers. We haven't built, in my opinion, enough affordable rental housing. And I think with the development of New Park Mall and some of the other residential rental that we will have, I think that'll make that transition from rental to buying a much easier financial transition for folks to make. Councilmember Jorgens.
Yeah, thank you. I do think there's a very big difference between a lighting district that, is through the city that does benefit the whole city of Newark, our whole community, versus an HOA. And I think, as we look at some of, one of Newark residents' big concerns is this, they don't feel like they're in a neighborhood of opportunity. I think that is a result of us going, so heavy on HOAs. One question I do have about that, though, is I know a lot of times with HOAs, it's the developer itself that is in control of the HOA at the beginning of the process, and then it gets handed over to residents, and at that time you see a big fee increase. Do we have ordinances in place right now that would prevent that?
I'm not aware of any ordinances. Just looking over to yeah, no.
That may be something we want to look into as we move forward.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments before we move into the safety element? Mr. Turner, go ahead and proceed.
Great, thank you. With that, we will go ahead and focus on the other element we are seeking an update on this evening. It's the safety element, again, also known today as our natural hazards element. We are updating this element in order to be consistent with state law, but also going through the exercise to understand those natural hazards in our community and how to best respond to them, certainly at the general plan level. So with that, I'll hand it over to our consultant, Grace Nelson from Environmental Science Associates. She's attending tonight virtually, so we're going to cross our fingers and make sure that she can go ahead and give her presentation. So one moment, please, before we get her started.
Grace, do you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, please proceed.
Okay, and Grace, I will work the slides for you this evening. Just let me know when to proceed.
Okay, great, thank you. Good evening, everyone. So first, we're going to be going over the statutory framework for the safety element. Under California state law, each jurisdiction is required to have a safety element that protects the community from any unreasonable environmental risk. And the state law also dictates that the safety element be updated concurrently with the housing element, hence why we're doing it now. And each safety element must include goals, policies, and actions to address each hazard and increase the community's resilience to climate impacts. As of 2019, there are a few new requirements related to evacuation planning and how they relate to safety elements. The first being Senate Bill 99, which requires the identification of any residential developments with less than 2 evacuation routes within the city. And the second one is Assembly Bill 747, which requires the identification of evacuation routes and their capacity, safety, and viability under a range of relevant emergency scenarios. And in a later slide, we'll discuss how the updated safety element satisfies both of these 2 new statutes. Next slide, please. For a little bit of background, the safety element, again, is one chapter within the city's guiding general plan, and it identifies safety issues and related needs which are anticipated to be of ongoing concern to the people of Newark. This updated plan specifically is intended to ensure the city takes action to reduce natural and man-made hazards and safety threats and responds quickly to public safety incidents. And again, we'd like to highlight that in 2013 in the general plan, this element was called the environmental hazards element, but it's now titled the safety element. Next slide, please. This slide shows an overview of our process for updating the safety element. We began by reviewing relevant plans and then moved on to analyze existing conditions related to hazards within the city. We coupled our research with a community survey and used all of the collected research and community feedback to draft the updated element. Next slide, please. So we weren't able to fit all of the relevant policy and planning documents here, but this is a limited list of some of the plans we reviewed in preparation of developing the updated safety element. And notably, the environmental hazards element from 2013 and the Union City Newark multi-jurisdictional local hazard mitigation plan from 2017. Next slide, please. So we performed an existing conditions analysis of each of the topics here, which correspond with the hazard topics in the safety element. The analysis is provided in Appendix A of the safety element and provides more comprehensive overview of each of these topics. The orange topics here indicate that these are new topics to the updated element and were not included in the 2013 environmental hazards element or the general plan. And we're going to go into more detail on a few of these hazards to describe what changed and the findings which influenced policy recommendations in this updated element. Next slide, please. To solicit community feedback related to the safety element and hazards of concern within the community, we distributed a community survey via the SurveyMonkey platform. Then we used the feedback from the survey to develop the goals, policies, and actions in the safety element. Next slide, please. And to prepare the updated element, again, we took all of this information from the relevant plans, the existing conditions analysis, and the community survey, which all informed how we developed the goals, policies, and actions. Next slide, please. So next we'll be going into those specific hazard topics, and I'll discuss if the topic appeared in the 2013 general plan, present some key findings and issues from the existing conditions report, and describe a few select policy topics that are aimed to address these issues from the key findings. Next slide, please. Air quality was a topic in the 2013 general plan, but it was included in the health and wellness element. In our existing conditions analysis, we found that there are disproportionately high rates of asthma in the city, especially near Interstate 880 and State Route 84. And these conditions are influenced by the presence of diesel particulate and PM 2.5, which we have included in the figure here, which shows the prevalence of those. In response to these findings, some of the policies related to this topic include guidelines for implementing the forthcoming climate action plan, as well as guidelines for land use planning to improve air quality. Next slide, please. Next, drought and water quality was a topic of the 2013 general plan, but it was included in the conservation and sustainability element. Our existing conditions analysis found that surface water and groundwater in the city is primarily polluted from urban runoff, including runoff from hazardous sites. Water pollution is also impacted in the city by saltwater intrusion and hazardous material leakage. And we've included a map here of groundwater threats in the city, which appears in the updated safety element. So some of the policies to address these findings include guidelines for addressing and preventing water pollution and investing in long-term water security for the future of businesses and residents within the city. Next slide, please. Moving on to flooding hazards, this policy topic was discussed in the 2013 general plan under the environmental hazards element. In our existing conditions analysis, we show that the southwestern and southern areas of the city are within 100-year flood zones, and there are also smaller areas throughout the city, including residential neighborhoods, that are within the 500-year flood zone. In response to these findings, we've included specific policies with guidance for mitigating the impacts of flood hazards on community members and policies to invest in physical infrastructure such that it can withstand the impact of floods. Next slide, please. Hazardous materials was also a topic in the 2013 environmental hazards element. The existing condition report highlights that in the city of Newark, there are a sizable number of industrial uses that involve hazardous materials, and the rail and freeway network in and near the city are often used to transport hazardous materials. In response to these findings, policies under this topic aim to protect both new and existing developments from the harm associated from proximity to hazardous materials. Next slide, please. So the final specific topic that we'll be covering in more detail is emergency preparedness, which also appeared in the 2013 environmental hazards element. Since the city is vulnerable to hazards including earthquakes, floods, drought, and hazardous material incidents, this makes emergency preparedness essential to promoting safety within the city. Policies to support emergency preparedness include requirements for informing community members of available resources to prepare for emergencies and guidance on evacuation planning and notifications. Which leads me to the next slide, which is on SB 99 and AB 747. So under the emergency preparedness section, the safety element includes a section of emergency evacuation, which satisfies requirements established by SB 99 and AB 747. And we have a detailed analysis of this, which is provided in Appendix B of the safety element. In summary, we satisfied these requirements by mapping residential parcels with only one point of access within the city. And in our analysis, we found that there are many residential parcels within cul-de-sacs where the parcels are limited by only one access road. And additionally, to satisfy AB 747, we completed an analysis of multiple evacuation scenarios, focusing on the availability of roadways during various flood emergencies. And this analysis found that various topographical features such as the bay and the industrial uses limit the direction and number of evacuation routes available during an emergency scenario. A complete analysis of these points, again, can be found in the Appendix B of the safety element. And this concludes our presentation of the safety element. Thank you.
Thank you. I will go ahead and pause again to see if there's any comments or questions from council.
Questions, comments? No, please proceed.
Very good. So we're in the home stretch of this very long presentation. Thank you for your patience. I'm going to conclude with just a quick overview of the environmental review process, the Planning Commission recommendation, and our next steps. So all of the actions that we're requesting Council to consider tonight are subject to the California Environmental Quality Act. They are a project as defined under CEQA. The city staff has prepared that necessarily environmental review, and we prepared an addendum to the City of Newark General Plan Tune-Up Environmental Impact Report that was prepared with the adoption of the 2013 General Plan. With our analysis, we found that there's no new significant environmental impacts and no substantial increases in the severity of previously identified impacts. That the housing element and safety element as proposed remain subject to all the previously adopted mitigation measures, and that no new mitigation measures or alternatives are required. So beyond the addendum, there's no specific environmental or CEQA document that needs to be adopted tonight. So the Planning Commission reviewed the housing element and safety element at their meeting earlier this week on October 24th. The Planning Commission made a recommendation to City Council to adopt the housing element and the safety element, as well as the revisions that we discussed earlier this evening. The Planning Commission, in summary, certain members had comments with regards to the housing element and safety element. On the sort of the positive side, certain members were appreciative of the fair housing policies that were included in the housing element, programs to maintain and improve the existing housing stock. That's part of the residential inspection program, and investments in maintenance and improvements to the residential stock. The tenant and renter protection programs had broad support, as well as the development of a new inclusionary housing ordinance that would provide more affordable units in the city. On the other side, commissioners were concerned about the loss of local control, and I think that was expressed here as well, that through state legislation, it seems that more projects are ministerial, and there's less ability for a jurisdiction to apply any sort of discretionary type of standards that would be unique or more applicable to the local jurisdiction. So loss of local control was a comment. Parking standard reductions, as discussed here, very similar comments shared by the Planning Commission as well. The by right approvals with minimal city discretion, again, state legislation as reflected in our policies and programs under certain circumstances. If you provide a certain percentage of affordable units, it often removes discretion except for objective design standards from many of those residential developments. So some concern about that, certainly appreciative of the affordable units that would come as a result of those projects, but again, taking away local control was a concern. As well as changes to low density residential neighborhoods. That's reflected in our policies and programs to support missing middle housing, as well as to be compliant with state legislation such as SB 9 and SB 10, which promotes sort of urban lot splits to create smaller lots with perhaps smaller dwelling units that could be more affordable. I think there was support for those general programs, but concern about the change that those programs might bring to established low-density residential neighborhoods. Given the sort of pluses and minuses and pros and cons that the Planning Commission reviewed, ultimately they felt that the housing element and safety element provided a good balance for the direction of our community over the next 8 years, and recommended that the City Council adopt both the housing element and the safety element. So in terms of next steps, as we mentioned before, we will continue working with HCD staff to incorporate the revisions that we discussed tonight into the housing element. We do meet regularly with staff, so they are answering our calls and emails and are meeting with us on a regular basis, and we will continue to do so. And we expect to have those discussions through the end of December, at which point we expect to receive HCD certification of our housing element. We will return, as described actually in the adoption resolution we're recommending tonight, staff will return to the Planning Commission and City Council within 60 days of certification to review all of the revisions that were though ultimately included within the housing element, so that the Planning Commission and Council and the public are fully aware of the certified housing element and what's in there and what has changed. So with that, staff's recommendation tonight is that City Council adopt a resolution, an amendment to repeal the fifth cycle housing element for the period of 2015 to 2023 and adopt the housing element of the general plan for the period 2023 to 2031 and repeal the existing natural hazards element and adopt the safety element of the general plan, all in compliance with state housing law. Staff is also recommending that the City Council incorporate the housing element revisions that were described in the memorandum at Places and summarized by myself this evening. With that, that concludes our lengthy presentation. Thank you very much for your patience. We're very happy to take any comments or questions and hear from the public through the public hearing process.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. Before I entertain any questions or comments from my colleagues, I'm going to go ahead and open up the public hearing for consideration and adoption of the 2023-2031 housing element and safety element of the City of Newark's general plan. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak to this item? Seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing and now return to my colleagues for questions or comments. I'll start on my left, Councilmember Jorgens.
Yeah, I want to thank you for the presentation. I know this is something that staff went over and consultants went over with our planning commission earlier this week. So doing two very long presentations like that in the span of a couple of days, I know is a lot of work, and I know it also reflects an incredible amount of work behind it. And I'm really appreciative of all the details that came forward, and all of my questions were able to be answered. Just one more question from me on our inclusionary unit policy. I'm really excited to see that come forward. It's, to me, a lot better to see, it built in at a certain time rather than, saying, hey, we've got these fees to build, affordable housing somewhere in Newark at some indeterminate future time. Do we have a set percentage in mind that we're looking for?
We don't have a set percentage in mind. We would go through a study or a nexus study in particular to assess the impacts of development on the need for housing in the community. Based upon that nexus study, there would be a proposal for a certain percentage that would mitigate the impacts of development on housing. Most cities have a percentage currently of somewhere between 10 and 15%. The state is sort of leaning on the high side of 20%. That is their threshold in a lot of cases, whereby projects can be approved in a more of a ministerial or streamlined fashion. 20% may be a high percentage for Newark. It might be very appropriate. We won't know that until we complete the nexus study, but that would, of course, be a part of staff's recommendation to Planning Commission and Council on a specific percentage. But generally, most cities have it between 10 and 15%.
And then, thank you. And then I just wanted to share some of my frustrations about the parking requirement. This is, parking, people in Newark need cars because to get where they need to go, whether it's shopping or to jobs, we're just not well served by public transit, especially rail. We heard about, maybe we would get a stop, at Ardenwood, but that's, it's still potential. The big maybe is always Dumbarton Rail. And, Dumbarton Rail is something that, would be incredibly beneficial for Newark residents in terms of, our quality of life here. It would, we've done things, we've set aside space for a station. We're doing the work to be able to build transit-oriented developments there, but there's no rail. This is something that's been studied since before I was born. It's been a long time, and we're seeing nothing there. We're coming to this, idea of building housing along a potential rail station with, a lot of enthusiasm for what it could be. And it's disappointing that in parallel to our enthusiasm about that, we're not seeing similar, enthusiasm and requirements around, potential public transit. Especially for State Route 84, we saw that was one of our corridors that we were looking at that had a disproportionate asthma rate. And that's something that public transit could help. It would help, Newark residents get to where they need to go, which is a lot of times jobs on the other side of the bay. And it's, really frustrating for me to see that, we put together this plan and there's this huge piece of it that is outside of our control and that has been studied for my entire life and doesn't seem like there's a lot of progress there. With that said, I am glad to see we're using, the tools we do have at our disposal to make, Newark more affordable. Another thing on transportation, I saw one of our policies was going to be a bicycle storage at homes. I think it's going to be important that we also have incentive programs at businesses. So when people go somewhere on a bike, that they can park their bike there as well. Just having a storage at home isn't as valuable as having it where you need to be as well. And then I'm really excited about the home buyers program coming back towards us for a vote hopefully soon to see what that policy is. I think that's going to have a huge benefit on our residents.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Bucci.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'll keep my comments brief since I've said a lot tonight. I am also excited about the first-time homebuyer program. When I first ran for office in 2011, at the time, the redevelopment funds for the state had just dried up, and the state's first-time home buyer program had come to an end. And that was a thing that I was interested in getting started at the city level. I campaigned on it. We have a group have been talking about it for the last 5 or 6 years. So when I saw it in here, and then I saw the aggressive and optimistic timeline of trying to have that program in place by June, made me very happy. So thank you, guys. I think that that's going to make a huge impact in town. I'm also excited to see the rental inspection program get off the ground, and that's something that the mayor had spoken about, and it was something I hadn't even really considered until he brought it up. But the truth is, I know a lot of people who have rental properties who are afraid to mention anything to the landlord because they can't afford the rent to get raised. And it seems like they fix, a squeaky door and your rent goes up $300 a month. So I am excited to see about that. The ADUs, the program, one of the things that we had talked about is a way to curb costs for people is, and folks might not realize this, but one of the big upfront costs of an ADU is having the architect draw up the plans. We had discussed having a few pre-approved plans available for folks, either a one or a two or a studio kind of layout, maybe a couple different designs that folks who were interested in the ADU could come in. It's already a pre-approved design that they can choose, and then they can not have to pay an architect $30,000 to design it for them. I hope that that's part of the ADU program, and I'm hoping that that's something we can get going sooner than later. Other than that, Mr. Turner, I know you've put a lot of effort into this, and it is quite a challenge to balance the new state regulations with the personalities of your council members and commissioners, and I think that you have navigated it beautifully. I appreciate your hard work, as well as Paul and Christy. Thank you, guys, both of you. I know what a challenge it can be, and I think this is a great final product, so thank you.
Vice Mayor Courthouse.
Thank you, Your Honor. I think everything's wonderful. ADUs, fantastic. The plans that we've had in the past to have plans already for the residents that want to do that. Parking. It frustrates me as I drive down the roads and there's no parking for our residents. They have 3 drivers, they have 3 automobiles, they have maybe a boat, maybe a trailer, an RV. There's no way that you're going to get around people not having these. Or collectors, collecting cars, old cars that are been rebuilt, and they have that in their garage. It's just, there's no way that you're going to have a household with 4 adults and 1 automobile. I just don't see it. Unless I see it in a cartoon and it comes true, it's not going to happen. It's just, it's not feasible for a family to live that way, especially here in Newark. Thank you.
I escaped that one. I thought she was going to say, you know what, How would you like to live next to Mayor Hannon?
With 7 drivers.
With 7 adult children, each one of them having a car. See how that, and he lives in a cul-de-sac, oh, by the way. So thank you for not mentioning that. I want to echo my colleagues' comments, Mr. Turner, and to the consultants as well. Outstanding effort and outstanding work, really. I can't even imagine the amount of hours that you have put into this project, recognizing it's a priority not only of the state for us to get our housing element adopted, but it's a priority of the city as well. So huge thank you for your efforts. I hope you appreciate that. A couple slides I took note of the cost burden to our residents in terms of their housing and what percentage of their income has to go to housing. When I see a certain percentage of our residents are paying 50% of their income just to live in our community, that in and of itself should be an eye-opener. And when the state mandates that if we make 20% of those units affordable, you can go ahead and build a project, I would like to see the state go further, that 20% of those housing units needed to be for low income or very low income residents. I really would like to see that. And I think it's a message that this council is sending forward, that when we talk about affordability, I don't think we're talking about market rate affordability. I think we're talking about the low income and the very low income. And I want to see a higher percentage of those units incorporated in the development. I know we have ordinances coming forward in the near future that we'll have an opportunity to comment on that. I was really pleased to see the tenant support when it comes to anti-displacement and just cause and things of that nature. Just briefly, how do we implement something like that, Mr. Benoon, Mr. Turner? Will we have somebody on staff that will be here to assist tenants that are faced with that situation, that can advocate on their behalf, or at least review the conditions on their behalf and weigh in as to what the appropriate resolution is?
Currently, the city offers those services through Echo Housing. So that is our service provider by which, if there is an issue that a tenant may have with their landlord, or is looking for financial assistance or information on programs that may be available, we would refer them to Echo Housing, and they have a number of service providers and staff that answer those questions. That has worked well for Newark in the past. I think that there's more that Community Development Department can do to kind of more directly engage with our residents, and so we'll look forward for opportunities to do more of that.
Great. I'm really concerned about that issue, displacement of tenants and just cause issues and things of that nature. Maybe sometime in 2024, if we could have somebody from Echo come in and do a presentation as to the services they provide to our community and what that looks like, I would certainly appreciate that. Otherwise, I'm looking for a motion to adopt a resolution for a general plan amendment to repeal the fifth cycle housing element for the period of 2015 through 2023 and adopt the housing element of the general plan for the period 2023 through 2031 and repeal the existing natural hazard element and adopt the safety element of the general plan in accordance with the state housing law. And in addition, we want to incorporate those comments that were elicited by Mr. Turner as a result of the most recent comments by HCD as reflected in the October 26th memo to City Council. If I can get a motion in a second. So moved. By Councilmember Bucci.
Second.
By Councilmember Jorgens. Let's vote. And that passes unanimously. I just want to take a moment just to applaud city staff for their effort.
Resolution of the City of Newark adopting general plan amendment to repeal the fifth cycle housing element for the period of 2015-2020, adopting housing element general plan for period of 2023-2031, adopting safety element of the general plan in compliance with state housing element law.
Thank you. Mr. Benoon, if you think the next item is going to go a little bit long, is it okay? Maybe we take a 5-minute break for restrooms, things of that nature. So let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break, folks, and let's return at 10:20 to resume.
Thank you for your patience. I'm going to go ahead and reconvene the city council meeting. Under other business, we have one, waive full reading and by title only, introduce an ordinance to repeal and replace Title 16 subdivisions of the Newark Municipal Code. Mr. Benoon?
Yes, good evening, Your Honor, and members of the council. Tonight, there's a presentation from our principal engineer, Ms. Diana Kenko, outlining and summarizing the terms of a proposed new subdivision ordinance. The existing ordinance that is currently on the books was adopted well over 40 years ago, fairly outdated. We do have a fair amount of technical items that staff recommends be implemented and adopted, as well as a request that that any item that requires reissuance, any of those maps, that return to the originating body, whether that be a staff, PC, or CC. Tonight we have, in addition to Ms. Kenko, we have City Engineer Jason Amai. The proposed ordinance does reference the city engineer many times, and therefore his presence is here, as well as our Community Development Director, Mr. Stephen Turner, will join us at the dais as well. It's a presentation by Ms. Kenko, but we were all more than happy to address any questions that the council may have, as this was a collaborative effort. Ms. Kenko.
Thank you. Good evening, and a long evening that is, Mayor Hannon and members of the City Council. My name is Diana Kenko. I'm a principal civil engineer with the Public Works Engineering Division. I am here tonight to present the proposed subdivision ordinance and to request an introduction to repeal and replace the Title 16 subdivision of the Newark Municipal Code. So at tonight's presentation, I'll go over the purpose of the ordinance, the background, the summary of substantive changes, and staff's recommendation. Title 16 subdivision of the Newark Municipal Code is commonly referred to as the subdivision ordinance. The purpose of the subdivision ordinance is to regulate and control the design and improvement of subdivisions of land within the city and supplement the provisions of the Subdivision Map Act of the state of California. So a little background, we have an existing subdivision ordinance that was adopted on August 11th, 1977 as ordinance number 143. Since its adoption in 1977, it has not been amended. The city reviewed the existing subdivision ordinance and decided to initiate revisions. The reasons for the city initiated revisions are the following: to provide clear and concise language for decision-making and review processes, to incorporate streamlined language by simplifying processes and procedures, to ensure that the ordinance reflects the current practices of the latest version of the State Subdivision Map Act, and to ensure that the extension requests return to the decision-making body for consideration. So the next few slides, I'm going to go through a summary of substantive changes, but before I do, I'd like to point out two items. First, the changes being proposed to the subdivision ordinance have little to no impact to the Planning Commission's or City Council's ability to review residential or commercial projects. The Planning Commission and City Council will maintain their existing review authority for any proposed entitlements for residential or commercial construction projects. Second, there are key words that are used frequently throughout the subdivision ordinance. They are subdivision, tentative map, parcel map, and final map. I'd like to take a few minutes just to go over those definitions. They are defined in the subdivision ordinance, the proposed subdivision ordinance. So subdivision means the division by any subdivider of any unit or units of improved or unimproved land, or any portion thereof, as shown in the latest equalized county assessment roll as a unit or as contiguous units for the purpose of sale, lease, or financing, whether immediate or future, and as further defined in Government Code Section 66424. Tentative map means a map made for the purpose of showing the design and improvement of a proposed subdivision and the existing conditions in and around it. Tentative map includes both tentative parcel map and tentative tract map. Parcel map means a map showing a subdivision of 4 or fewer parcels, prepared in accordance with the provisions of this title in the Subdivision Map Act and designed to be recorded in the Office of the Alameda County Recorder. A parcel map also means a map showing a subdivision of 5 or more parcels under the final map exemption in Government Code Section 66426A through E. The final map means a map showing a subdivision prepared in accordance with the provisions of this title and the Subdivision Map Act and designed to be recorded in the office of the Alameda County Recorder. To sort of simplify, a parcel map is typically a division of land for 4 or fewer parcels, where a final map is for a division of land for 5 or more parcels. So now I'm going to go through the summary of substantive changes. The first one is a chapter of the subdivision, the chapters of the subdivision ordinance. So you see in the slide a table that shows the current chapters of the existing subdivision ordinance on the left-hand side, and then on the right-hand side, the proposed chapters of the subdivision ordinance. The chapters generally follow the same sequence. The new chapters were added to the proposed subdivision ordinance to provide additional information about the processes consistent with the Subdivision Map Act. The second item is an incorporation of a Table 16-1, which is titled Subdivision Review Authority. In this slide, you'll see that Table 16-1, and this table is added to the proposed subdivision ordinance to clearly identify decision-making authority for all types of subdivision applications. I'd like to point out that there are superscript texts, and those texts on the table refer to the notes on the bottom of the table. So for the Note 1 defines decision, which means that the review authority makes the final decision on the matter. And then it defines appeal, which means that the review authority may consider and decide upon appeals of the decision of an early decision-making body in accordance with Government Code Section 66452.5. The second note states, at its sole discretion, the review authority may transfer original hearing jurisdiction to a higher body. To illustrate this, I'd like to point out an example. So if you look at the first line item, tentative parcel map, the decision body would be under this table, Community Development Director. If for some reason that project has unique or unusual circumstances, policy implications, or just the magnitude of the project, then the Community Development Director has the sole discretion to transfer that approving, to disapprove, to approve, or conditionally approve a map, the tentative parcel map, to Planning Commission. The third note says for tentative maps subject to concurrent processing, the Planning Commission makes a recommendation to the City Council. So for this example, if you look at the line item for tentative tract map, the table identifies Planning Commission as a decision body. In this case, if a project has concurrent land use applications that require City Council approval, the decision to approve, conditionally approve, or disapprove the tentative tract map will then be transferred to City Council. The other substantive changes include effective period of approved tentative map and discretionary map extension. The effective period of an approved or conditionally approved tentative map is 24 months from the date of its approval. The Subdivision Map Act of the State of California allows up to 6 additional years to be added to that effective period of a tentative map, subject to local ordinance. So for our proposed subdivision ordinance, we would like to limit the extensions of that time to be added to the effective period of an approved or conditionally approved tentative map for up to 2 years. Therefore, the extension of the effective period of only up to 2 years would supersede the 6-year period of the Subdivision Map Act. The decision-making authority for the discretionary extensions of time would be the original approving body. However, in the case of tentative maps that were approved by City Council as a result of other land use applications, then the decision-making authority would be the Planning Commission. The next item I'd like to talk about is the release of securities. Once construction of a subdivision is complete, under the existing subdivision ordinance, improvements, acceptance, and release of securities is recommended by the city engineer and formally approved by the City Council. Under the proposed subdivision ordinance, the city engineer will be designated as the official for acceptance, release, and partial release of securities. The third bullet item is other added sections. There are new sections that were added to the proposed subdivision ordinance, which include tentative parcel map waivers, map amendments, certificate of corrections, and lot line adjustments. These were added to align with the city's current procedures and to clarify the processes. So I'd like to conclude my presentation with staff's recommendation, which is to recommend that City Council waive full reading and by title only introduce an ordinance to repeal and replace Title 16 subdivisions of the Newark Municipal Code. I'll be happy to take questions at this time.
Great. Before I open up for questions by my colleagues, is there anybody in the audience who would like to ask questions? Seeing none, I'll turn back to my colleagues for questions, comments. Councilmember Bucci.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess I'm curious as to why the engineer would have final say on the release of securities.
At the time when the subdivision is complete, all the improvements are done. And so if the subdivider has met the requirements of the improvements that are required as part of the plan, then the only step that needs to happen would be the release of securities. It is an act that it's not discretionary. So as long as that the subdivider meets all the requirements of improving or installing the improvements, then our role it would be to release the securities.
No, I understand how it works. I guess my question is, shouldn't, normally at the engineer level, they would say that, okay, we've completed this stuff, and then they would kick it upstairs to where whoever is overseeing them would then confirm that all of those requirements have been met before we release securities. I guess I just have some reservation about the release of securities being in one person's hand and that person being the engineer and not somebody, a department head.
It is very common with other cities that they look to the city engineer to let them know if the subdivision has completed their requirements for installing those improvements. The Public Works Director may or may not be an engineer, and part of the improvements that are included with the subdivision require line and grade, making sure that we have a certain size of pipes or infrastructure. And so it makes more sense to have the city engineer confirm those through their staff, through inspections, and that the city engineer would then say, okay, you've met your requirements for installing the improvements, therefore we could release your securities.
No, I get that. I guess I would rather have a department head make that final. The engineer recommends, they write the form, hey, all of the requirements have been met, and then they kick it up to the Public Works Director and for kind of a final approval on it before those are released. I mean, I'm just not comfortable having a city engineer just to have the ability to release securities and then something happens down the road where it shouldn't happen. It's more kind of a checks and balance thing. I think that's a lot of releasing of securities is a lot of power for a city engineer.
Well, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Imai, that the Subdivision Map Act does compel the city engineer to make those determinations. So in other words, it's the city engineer who reviews the plans, reviews the map, confirms all the conditions are met, and then goes ahead and signs off. They're the ones who ultimately make that determination. Under the existing code, the council simply approves, okay, yes, we can release it, but it's per the city engineer's determination. It's a non-discretionary matter. The difference, I think, between the Public Works Director and the city engineer is that the city engineer is, while true, it is not a department head, The municipal code does specify who the city engineer is and does delegate that authority to the city engineer. I don't, Mr. Iman, I don't know if I explained that correctly, if you have anything else you'd like to add.
For the most part, yes, that is correct. So the improvements are done as a condition of the map. So the city engineer approves the map with certain conditions as approved. One of the conditions is the improvement of the subdivision improvements. Now, once engineering staff confirms that those improvements are met, city engineer, who is the division head in charge of the engineering division, confers with their staff, confirms that all the conditions of the map have been completed, and so per the agreement, the subdivision improvement agreement that was signed between the city and the state, we determined that all the conditions were met. And under the professional judgment of the city engineer, the decision is made to release or not the securities.
And just to amplify what the city manager said, that has been the procedure all along. The city engineer makes the recommendation to the city council, and on a consent item, we approve the city engineer's report and allowing the funds to be released. So it's kind of been that way. We're taking the city council kind of out of the process.
Yeah, but we've also had the chance to at least review it, and if we're going to take the city council out of it, shouldn't somebody else have a chance to look at it before we do something as serious as release securities? I guess it just feels like we're taking away a layer of oversight.
Well, I mean, these are non-discretionary matters. They're very technical in nature is how I look at it. The issue is whether or not the developer has met the conditions from a technical perspective, and the developer has met that. I think it's as simple as a yes or no. It's very dissimilar to the whole iterations that we've been dealing with the state on the housing element, not to bury what we just finished or open that back up. So in my mind, I think it's a fairly technical process.
And these would be issues as have they completed building the roads? Have they installed all of the street lights? Have they put down all of the pavement striping? Have they cleaned up the site and things like this? So these are information that is relayed from staff to senior engineering management to the city engineer, who's the head of the division, and then under his or her professional judgment, they would make the decision on whether or not the securities can be released, if the physical improvements have been completed in the field.
If I can add, a city engineer is typically a licensed engineer, and being licensed, we have a responsibility to make sure that everything is done accordingly. I know you mentioned about checks and balances, and so as a city engineer, we want to make sure we abide by our requirements of being responsible and making sure everything has been installed. So I know you had thought about you're wondering, okay, it comes out of the engineering department. Should another person that's outside that be the person that says, okay, everything's done and it can be released? But as someone who's a professional licensed engineer, I think they make sure that their responsibility is upheld.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Other questions, Councilmember?
Nope, I'm good, thank you.
Thank you for the excellent presentation. I appreciate it. I just want to go back, if I may, to a slide previously, if I may. Effective period of approval, tentative map, and discretionary extensions. Let me give an example, and please correct me if I'm wrong. Developer comes in with a proposed development, Planning Commission approves it, City Council approves it. They have 2 years to build the project out. Currently, if they wanted an extension for any particular reason, the Community Development Director could grant a 1-year extension. What this allows, the applicant now needs to go back to the Planning Commission, not to the Economic Development Director, and they need to make that request through the Planning Commission. Is that a correct summary?
That is correct, yes.
And the reason I think this is important, and I've been advocating for this for some time, is we've approved a number of developments around our city, and we currently see vacant lots that have not been developed. And the first one that occurs to me, of course, is Mayhew's Landing and Newark Boulevard. And their now development permit has expired. So if they do want to come back to the city, they need to go back to the Planning Commission, because at the time that we made that approval, circumstances may have changed. What we thought was a great development back then, 2-3 years ago, we may not be so keen on that development today, or may want to incorporate additional changes to that development. And again, it's no disrespect to our economic development team, but I think the council and the commission should have the opportunity to weigh back in on these development proposals. So I'm glad to see that discretionary extension being returned to the commission, at least in the scenario that I described. So, any other questions or comments? If not, I need a motion and a second to approve the changes to this ordinance.
Motion moved.
By Vice Mayor Collazo, by Councilmember Freitas. Please vote. And that passes unanimously, 5 ayes.
An ordinance of the City of Newark repealing Title 6 of the City of Newark Municipal Code in its entirety.
Thank you. City matters. Let's start to my Councilmember Jorgen.
Thank you. I just wanted to let our community know that, so since 2019, Newark has been served by East Bay Community Energy for our energy procurement. This week, EBCE changed its name to Ava Community Energy. So if you start seeing the name Ava Community Energy around, don't be concerned. There's nothing changed other than the name. When you turn on your lights, the light bulbs are still going to go on. It's just a name change to Ava Community Energy.
Thank you, Councilmember Jorgens. Councilmember Freitas.
Thank you, Honor. 2 or 3 things, but the first, I'd like to extend my deepest sympathy to Anna Padoka. Mother passed about 2 weeks ago. Anna served on this body for about 10 years ago for 1 term or 2 terms. So, very good friends. And yeah, I'd like to extend my deepest sympathy to not only to Anna, but the entire family. Secondly, last Saturday was the citywide cleanup to the Newark residents to haul out their debris away to the city yard. And I was one of those over 300 applicants signed before to be on the list of, God, let me thank you, this Public Works Department / maintenance, the employees, they were great. I was maybe over 20 employees assigning to receiving the well-organized, so that it's impressed, if you will, with the arrangements they made was so smooth. Was the line up to the Becca up to Central Avenue in the morning. So it was a very good service they provided to, and I believe it's twice a year, so that it's with the public service and very gentle people back there on the yard. So the third thing it is, and I'm going back to the infill projects on the city, and as you mentioned, Mayor, just a while ago, the corners of Mayus and Newark Boulevard. It is a blight corner, if you will. It is a blight corner. I guess the City Council, we issued or approved about 8 or 9 infill projects, very small projects, but as you mentioned a while ago, maybe it was good at the time, but we are sick and tired of seeing the blight and the disrespect from the small developers, because like that developer that you mentioned a while ago, it's for sale. But it looks like an abundant piece of property. About 2 months ago, we approved this small development on the on Thornton and Mulberry, and two or three individuals was even applauding us for they want to move forward. So if you driving by that corner, it's a blight. They dumping debris. At least they should be on the conditional use permit. They should fence the property immediately after we approve the permit, and should be with that fabric we cannot see through, because if people dumping there, and where's the owners? Maybe they look into another developer because they want to make money up front. So it's not a good sign if you're trying to improve the quality of Newark residents. It's one of those points we should improve with the future issuing permits or going after the existing developments. We approve the infill properties. It's about 8, 9, or 10 in Newark. Thank you. Thank you.
And there's probably a permit condition that requires them to maintain the property until such time as the development commences. I would imagine there's probably some language in their permit. If not, certainly those are areas we can certainly ask code enforcement to take a look at.
Sure, regardless of whether or not there are permit conditions to that effect, we certainly will send out our code enforcement units. As to the specific site on Mayhews and Newark Boulevard, we have asked staff to increase the level of code enforcement activity as a result of the clear blight that is taking place at that location. The entitlements for that site have lapsed, so the developer did not come back and request an authorization for extension of the entitlements. So that would have to go through the planning process entirely from scratch. So as a result, we did direct staff to engage in code enforcement efforts because this will take some time before this property gets addressed.
Thank you.
As to the Mulberry site, staff will certainly take a look at that.
Thank you. Councilmember Bucci.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to give a shout out to our Newark boys football team. The Cougars won the homecoming game this week, so congratulations to them. It's always nice to walk away with a W. And I want to wish everybody a happy Halloween. Remind folks to slow down on Tuesday. There's going to be a lot of kids out, and if those kids stop by the Bucci house, we still give out big candy bars.
You just won't find any parking in front of the Bucci house. Vice Mayor Cuyoso.
Thank you, Your Honor. So, my condolences to the Apodaca family. The Apodacas were my customers since we opened up the store. Her mom and her dad. So, people that we truly appreciate and love. And so, my condolences out to the Apodacas. And I want to thank everybody that came out to the Dia de los Muertos celebration. It was a great event. We had, I think, a record number of people this year. It was a fantastic event. So now I'm looking to the city to maybe start closing up on Thornton Avenue and extending our celebration a little bit bigger for next year. Happy Halloween, be safe out there. Enjoy the day, enjoy the evening, but make sure you check the candies before your kids eat them. And if you're gonna buy candy, buy them in Newark, shop Newark.
I share my council colleagues' comments on all those issues, but I do want to end in a little bit more of a somber note. I'm going to close the council meeting tonight in recognition of the tragedy that occurred in Maine today. You see that our flags have been lowered to half-staff as a result of the president's order, recognizing that, again, we had another mass shooting in our country. A lot of innocent lives were lost. A lot of families are going to suffer. And so I want to close this meeting in recognition of those families, that we extend our support to them, and we hope that at some point in the near future, these tragedies will cease to occur. So with that in mind, I close the council meeting.